Picture a world suddenly thrown into a brutal ice age. Outside, the temperature has plunged to a relentless minus 60 degrees Celsius. In these deadly conditions, survival is a constant battle. Heat and food have become the most priceless treasures imaginable, especially among the frozen skyscrapers of South Korea's concrete wilderness. At first, the remaining people tried to endure together, but they soon faced the grim truth: there was never enough to feed everyone. That's when an all-out war erupted in the bitter cold. The narrow apartment hallways became battlegrounds. Yet amid the chaos stands one man, Han Feng. Fearless, he shelters inside his heavily fortified, heated refuge. Surrounded by women and a massive stockpile of food, he's a regressor who rewound time to just before the catastrophe, and he used that head start to prepare with precision. On top of that, he awakened a strange superpower, the ability to clone food and make it grow in size. But he didn't stop with that advantage. Eventually, he built a genuine stronghold of his own, complete with warmth, greenhouses, and even a full-on sauna. So how did this whole nightmare kick off? Let's rewind. A broadcast suddenly cuts out, plunging everything into silence. Then it's replaced by a booming voice echoing through the air. A young man trudges to the door, shivering in the brutal cold. Peeking through the peephole, he finds his longtime crush, Hyona, barely able to speak as she freezes outside. Without hesitation, he swings the door open to check on her, and he immediately ushers her into the warmth. In a startling twist, Hyona suddenly jumps forward and kisses him, leaving Han Feng stunned. She's not holding back either, putting real passion into the kiss. By the end, he's utterly speechless, wondering what's gotten into her. Inside, the guy feels like a total legend for finally getting this moment with his crush. Right then, Hyona confesses that she's always been in love with him. After plunging headfirst into an apocalypse, she claims she's realized he truly cares about people. To drive the point home, she guides his hand to her chest so he can feel her pounding heartbeat, promising she's ready to do anything with him. And that's the perfect trap our man falls into, because while he's busy daydreaming about romance, Hyona presses her thigh against him, intensifying the moment. His thoughts spiral as he loses himself in the rush. He blurts out that she means everything to him, but that this isn't the right time for such things. Proving how cunning she is, Hyona tells him to close his eyes and just enjoy it. Overjoyed, he obeys, curious and excited about what's next, like a kid on Christmas morning. But instead of more affection, his first kiss is followed by a brutal crack to the skull from her hidden boyfriend. A crushing blow drops him into a pool of blood. He trembles in agony while Hyona screams in shock. She didn't expect it to go that far, but her boyfriend coldly reminds her they both knew from the start that Han Feng had to die. In this frozen world, nobody spares anyone. Rather than showing remorse, they celebrate discovering Han Feng's stash of supplies. And for the decent guy who only wanted to help someone, he's left bleeding out, helpless as death creeps closer. The last thing he sees is Hyona clinging to her man in twisted excitement. Dying because of one cruel woman's scheme, he vows with his final breath that if he ever gets another chance, he'll never be used like this again. The terror around him fades into a soft, glowing light. He feels himself drawn toward it, thinking it might be heaven's gate. But that gentle hope shatters, as his spirit is torn apart by sudden agony, splintering into countless fragments. When the torment finally ends, he jerks awake in bed, drenched in sweat and disoriented. Moments ago he was dying, and now he's perfectly fine. Not only that, the world itself is untouched, no sign of apocalypse anywhere. Sunlight streams warmly through the window, a glow he thought he'd never feel again. Checking the calendar, Han Feng sees today as June 28, while the original end-of-the-world date was July 15. That means his death triggered a regression, sending him back a few weeks before the catastrophe. Shock, awe, and disbelief wash over him. Rebirth was never part of his plan. But he's not exactly the same. Let's talk about that strange red glow on his hand. Ever since waking, it's been shining non-stop. He waves it, trying to shake it off, but nothing changes. The light feels warm but painless, and he starts wondering if it's all in his head. Then a sudden sneeze catches him off guard, and now the same hand glows a brilliant green. The color shift only deepens his confusion, and this time the glow grows stronger and harder to control. Panicked and restless, he stares at the strange phenomenon, unsure what to do. Gradually, the green radiance shrinks and fades in an odd way, unlike the red. He collapses into a chair, noticing a sudden wave of exhaustion. Ever since that green light appeared, his energy has been draining fast. Frustrated, he waves his hand angrily. Then it hits him. This feels exactly like the overpowered rebirth stories he loves to read, where the hero comes back stronger than ever. To test it, he grabs a kitchen knife. Hoping for a miracle, he waits, but nothing happens, leaving him looking ridiculous. Meanwhile, his stomach growls loudly from the energy crash. He checks the fridge, only to find it completely empty. He needs food soon or he might pass out. Then he spots a jar of roasted soybeans on a shelf. Not exactly a meal, but good survival rations for a looming apocalypse. He grabs a handful, pops one into his mouth, and instantly, the bean explodes, sprouting into a full-grown plant before his eyes. The green glow vanishes, and so does his fatigue. Han Feng wonders if the soybean triggered it or if his power did. He snaps off a sprout to inspect it, amazed to realize this is his new ability. Fascinated, he's eager to study it further. But first things first, he needs to stock up before the world ends. So off to the supermarket he goes. In the next shot, he's weaving through a bustling crowd as people chatter while he mulls over everything. Two glowing hand modes, the draining green light, and the fact that one touch turns soybeans into sprouts. He still can't pin down how it works, which only frustrates him. Lost in thought, he suddenly hears a voice he knows too well. Hyona, the very woman who betrayed him in his past life, appears before him. She's stunning as ever, but getting close to her now is a straight ticket to the grave. Han Feng is genuinely taken aback to bump into her like this. Here's a bit more about his long-standing crush. Lee Hyona has been the girl he's quietly adored for 3 whole years. He tried every move he could think of to win her over, though deep down he always knew he was just a backup option at best. And now, after everything she did, tricking him and helping to get him murdered in cold blood, his anger simmers hot. Still, he's not the kind to lose control, especially now that he's been given a second chance at life. Han Feng steadies himself, deciding to save his vengeance for the right moment and focusing instead on gathering supplies. Hyona notices his faraway look and waves a hand in front of him, trying to snap him out of it. Keeping a polite front, he compliments her beauty, saying she stunned him into silence for a second. She teases him back, calling him a smooth talker. Then she uses the chance to invite him out for a shopping trip. But he brushes her off without hesitation, walking past as though she's not even worth a glance. The blunt rejection hits her so hard she's left speechless. Han Feng knows exactly what's happening. She just wants a free wallet for her groceries, and he's done being anyone's personal ATM. Next stop, the Waldemar shopping plot. This plaza is famed as the best-stocked supermarket in the whole area. In the previous timeline, the instant the icy apocalypse struck, this market was stripped bare overnight. Nobody ever figured out who cleared it out. Right now, Han Feng's mission is to haul in as much as he possibly can. Smart as he is, he's already pulled together a survival checklist: food, winter gear, medicine, everyday necessities, fuel, and a mountain of other essentials. But there's a snag. The guy's pockets aren't nearly deep enough for all that. While he's brooding over the problem, a sudden message pings on his phone, offering him a massive $170,000 loan for the year. It's basically the jackpot he needed. After all, who's going to bother paying debts once the world ends? So he jumps on every loan app he can find, stacking up credit like a pro. Meanwhile, the focus shifts back to Hyona, who's still fuming over the cold shoulder he gave her earlier. This stuck-up girl just can't believe her former simp brushed her off, proof of the same entitled attitude that got him killed last time. She mutters insults, calling him a broke loser with no car and vowing not to be nice again. Speak of the devil, a car pulls up and honks at her. Hyona's eyes widen in surprise when she sees the driver is none other than the man she was trash-talking. Han Feng rolls down the window and casually says he just bought the vehicle. He adds that his dad, who earns big in the States, wired him money and that he'd been busy taking his father to the airport. That explanation cools her temper. She figures he turned her down earlier because he had important errands. She even apologizes for inviting him out at a bad time. Playing the sweet, manipulative act, she pretends to cry and complains about how harsh he was. Han Feng responds in a way she didn't expect, first calling her silly, then pulling her into a light embrace, saying he'd never abandon someone like her. He tells her she's too important for that. The smug girl thinks she's won him back, so she turns on the charm again, claiming she feels the same and suggesting they watch a movie and grab dinner. But before she can finish, he casually says goodbye and walks off. He's already busy with the luggage he just bought, leaving Hyona stunned at the sheer amount of stuff he's carrying. Cool as ever, Han Feng explains it's just because he felt like it, then hints that he even picked up a gift for her. Delighted, she heads home, eager to see it later. She wears a smug, satisfied smile, thinking she's regained control. But Han Feng wears the exact same sly grin, both of them trying to outplay the other. He has no intention of revealing his secret stockpile. That cash is his lifeline. When the world freezes over, he plans to use it, and to take revenge on both her and the boyfriend who killed him. The thought of it actually excites him. He can't wait for Hyona to get what's coming. The doomsday date is only 2 weeks away, when heavy blizzards will blanket the planet and temperatures will plummet to around -20 degrees Celsius. Over the following month, the mercury will keep sinking toward -70, burying everything under endless snow and making outdoor travel impossible. That's why food is critical. Han Feng packs his apartment to the brim, disguising his hoard so no one catches on. For the trickier supplies, he plans to move them under cover of night. Another looming problem is electricity. With the grid bound to fail, fuel is vital. Han Feng has already stockpiled a year's worth and even hired builders to reinforce and insulate his home for the coming deep freeze. He's also set up a dedicated storeroom so he can access everything in secret whenever needed. By the time all this prep is complete, it's July 14, just one day before temperatures nosedive beyond control. With every major task checked off, the final item on his list is mastering his strange ability. He knows mere supplies won't guarantee survival. His plant-based powers might be his true edge. On the table sits the same batch of soybeans he grew with his gift, ready for a taste test. The challenge is figuring out what actually triggers his power, still. Han Feng scoops up a spoonful, hoping it's at least safe to eat. After finishing half the plate, he concludes there are no side effects. That means he can safely grow and consume food using this ability. The tricky part is nailing down what makes his hand glow. So far, he's only experimented with soybeans. He checks the fridge for other vegetables to test next. Afternoon fades quickly into evening. Feeling drowsy and drained, Han Feng blinks awake, wondering if he just blacked out. He's clutching a head of broccoli, the kitchen scattered with veggies. His thoughts are hazy from the energy drain. That's the biggest downside so far. He snacks on more soybeans to recharge. Reflecting, he realizes he's learned something new about his ability. Here's what happened right before he passed out. He ordered a variety of plants to experiment with. The results were puzzling. Some seeds showed no reaction at all. Others sprouted into full plants, just like the soybeans did. A few even exploded in his hands, a mystery he hasn't solved. Among the remnants, he found blackened chunks resembling charcoal. Surprisingly, those charred bits can be stored and later used for warmth. That discovery gives him another way to stay alive in the bitter cold. Thrilled, he keeps refining his power with more trials. Early attempts fail. But when Han Feng concentrates harder, the magical effect finally kicks in as he intends. Completely drained, he collapses onto the floor. Back in the present, he's still baffled by how unpredictable the ability is. Some plants respond, others don't. Pinpointing the exact trigger remains difficult. Yet he senses it's tied to his mind itself, so he meditates, seeking a deep connection with nature. In that serene state, body and mind align. His visualization pays off, because when he opens his eyes, his hand glows green again, confirming the power comes from his consciousness. To push the test further, he tries channeling the energy into a slab of raw meat just to see what happens. Sadly, meat won't react, which means he may have to live on plants for good. Despite pouring every ounce of focus into it and practically pleading for his powers to kick in, absolutely nothing responds. That dead silence makes him second-guess himself all over again. Remember that meditation trick of his? Whenever he dives into it, two vivid hues flash in his mind, one blazing red, the other a bright green. Up to now, he's only ever tested the green. So this round, he squeezes his eyes shut tight, determined to tap into that second, untried force. To his sheer astonishment, his palm suddenly flares crimson and sends a surge straight into the meat. In an instant, it twists into a grotesque, spiny lump that's barely recognizable. The sight alone turns his stomach. He drops the hunk onto the ground and steps closer to inspect it again. Han Feng pinches the warped meat, then grips it once more, wondering if it actually reacted to the scarlet glow radiating from his hand. Strangely, it even looks a little cooked, which raises the obvious question, does that red aura simply heat things up? Studying his own hand again, he starts piecing it together. No, the meat isn't really cooked at all. It's the reverse. The stuff is actually breaking down, disintegrating bit by bit. That realization clicks into a bigger discovery. The green light accelerates evolution while the red light drags it back, forcing decay. Hoping to fuse both powers, he presses the meat between his clasped palms. A sudden burst of yellow light erupts, and the same slab swells into a chunk larger than before. But then he wonders, what about the soybeans he'd been holding too? They vanished, which must mean they blended into the meat somehow. Han Feng marvels at the result, concluding after a closer look that this meat is the freshest he's ever laid eyes on. The thrill of it all pushes him to try the experiment again. Unfortunately, fate isn't on his side. The next attempt bombs so hard that everything turns pitch black. He slams his hands against the floor in pure frustration. Eventually, though, he reins it in and accepts he's got plenty of time to keep testing. He's genuinely pleased to have uncovered so many new tricks in a single day. If only he could fully master this strange gift. He even starts imagining himself as some kind of Superman, towering above the world. But then reality smacks him. Food alone won't keep him alive. He needs a weapon if he's going to fend off other humans. Just as he's thinking about heading out to buy one, a chilling thought strikes. The apocalypse has officially kicked off. Just like before, the planet is now drowning in an absurd July snowstorm. He heads out anyway, convinced he must score a gun before temperatures crash to -45. Problem is, buying a firearm is totally illegal here. Lost in that troubling thought, he spots a broccoli-haired loudmouth bragging about being Lao Wang's little brother from the Shijing Lida group. Classic. My brother's richer than you nonsense for winning petty spats. Han Feng instantly remembers this clown by his ridiculous fashion sense alone. Funniest part, locals have already nicknamed the guy Homeless Joe. Let's talk about Li Zi, aka Homeless Joe, who happens to live nearby. He's known as a contractor with connections all over the neighborhood. Folks swing by to ask him for the latest gossip, and he acts like the busiest man alive, forever bragging about his big projects with his famous brother. Truth is, the dude doesn't even have a real job and is usually caught whining into his phone, pretending he's juggling million-dollar deals. Watching him, Han Feng wonders if this fool might actually help him score a weapon. He greets Homeless Joe, pretending they're longtime pals. Look, this guy has zero clue who Han Feng even is. Playing along, Han Feng introduces himself as Xiao Han, milking the man's ego and acting like they're long-lost friends. The gullible vagrant takes the bait and apologizes for forgetting, claiming he's just swamped with work. Han Feng surveys the area, then moves in close, laying out his entire situation. When he finishes, Homeless Joe reels back in shock, demanding to know why he's so desperate for a gun. Han Feng hesitates, caught off guard, before he can craft a believable excuse. The blonde punk warns that guns are serious business and illegal. Sure, he's got the hookups, but that doesn't mean he's eager to wade into dangerous territory. Han Feng doubles down, explaining that it's strictly for self-defense because someone's holding a grudge against him. He spins a tall tale about bumping into a stranger on his way to work, both of them on bikes, when the guy suddenly spat right in his face. Naturally, that infuriated him, so he confronted the jerk and beat him senseless in front of a crowd. After humiliating the man, he walked off, only to hear the guy promise payback with his crew. Sure enough, the next day Han Feng got ambushed and roughed up by the entire gang. Since that beatdown, he's been determined to arm himself for protection. Luckily, Homeless Joe sympathizes, ranting that spitting on someone crosses the line and deserves punishment. Han Feng can't help thinking this dude might be missing the actual point. Still, Homeless Joe throws an arm around him like some kind of guardian angel, vowing to handle it and calling his big brother to sort everything out. Han Feng feels fortune finally tipping his way. Joe suggests they borrow the boss, since his fancy car is in the shop. Han Feng agrees and shows off that he's got a ride ready. As they roll out, Homeless Joe gapes at the vehicle's price. Han Feng casually mentions it set him back $700,000, which he considers a solid bargain. Joe instantly starts snapping photos like he's an Instagram influencer, even captioning them as if the SUV were his own. Speaking of that big brother, his gang is hanging around a fire, chatting about the ridiculous weather. Han Feng pulls up and Joe hops out, acting all smug. The gang can't believe Joe suddenly owns an SUV, and the slimeball actually claims he bought it for 700 grand himself. Han Feng can only marvel at the nerve of this guy, bragging in front of the real owner. Soon the punk escorts Han Feng to meet the boss, a tattooed gang leader who scowls the moment he sees them and promptly kicks his brother out. That's when Joe shoves the spotlight onto Han Feng, announcing his friend wants to buy a gun. The boss arches a brow and shoots Han Feng a hard stare. Han Feng feels his heart drop. The boss grumbles that they came all this way just for a single gun instead of something worthwhile. Still, he signals an underling to fetch a handgun, which he tosses to Han Feng with a $6,000 price tag. But Han Feng isn't about to settle for a puny sidearm. Nope, he's channeling full John Wick energy and asks for a long-range rifle with a scope. The boss freezes, surprised by the audacity, and snaps that Han Feng isn't in a position to bargain like he's shopping at a mall. The man's clearly irritated for no reason. That's when Joe jumps in with yet another wild tale, this one about Han Feng's wife cheating on him 3 times. By the time the story wraps, the boss is fuming on Han Feng's behalf. The outrageous saga could be straight out of a movie. Eventually, the boss relents and agrees to secure a sniper rifle, though it'll take a few days. Han Feng is genuinely thankful. He even orders his underling Cheng Zai to throw in a semi-auto as well. Out of pity, the boss tosses in a free handgun as a bonus. Han Feng is stunned to receive it without paying a dime. To show appreciation, he casually drops a crucial tip for the gang, warning that he's connected with government sources and that the brutal weather will only worsen, so they'd better stock up on supplies fast. He delivers the advice with a dead serious look, adding weight to his words. The boss nods, accepting the warning, and with that, their meeting wraps up. On the ride back, Joe brags about how smoothly he mediated the deal and notes it helped that his brother was in a good mood. Han Feng, grateful, offers to buy him a pile of cigarettes. Joe pretends to decline at first but eventually caves, demanding 8 full cartons like it's nothing. While Joe rambles on, Han Feng mentally checks off his survival list. He's got the gear for the coming apocalypse and plans to spend the rest of his time honing his powers. Only the food problem remains, but once that's solved, it's smooth sailing. Just as he's confidently mapping it all out, he suddenly slips right in front of Homeless Joe and crashes hard. Pain shoots through his leg as he trembles, while Joe stands there stunned, clueless about what just happened. The guy is almost certain he's fractured his leg, He passes the keys to Joe, hoping Joe can drive them to the hospital. Joe just stares back blankly before admitting, embarrassed, that he doesn't even have a license. With no other choice, he opts for the classic method. This punk awkwardly tries to help the protagonist hobble along. The whole moment is so painfully awkward that Han Feng finally calls a taxi to end the misery. Next thing we know, they've arrived at the hospital. Behind the front desk, Jiyeon, the head nurse, handles the late-night shift. She notices the snow outside piling higher by the hour. Suddenly, an urgent call comes through. They need her in the hall immediately because staff is running thin. And yes, it turns out the guy did crack his leg. He sits in the hospital, crushed as the doctor confirms the fracture. He has to stay under observation for an hour before he can leave with his prescriptions. All that careful planning of his, wrecked by one random twist of fate. Brother Lee says his goodbyes, explaining he's got a mountain of business deals to handle thanks to his jam-packed schedule, which dumps Han Feng right back at square one. Now he's completely alone, and to make matters worse, he's nursing a bum leg. The hospital is overflowing with patients. A sudden surge brought on by brutal weather and plunging temperatures, clear warning of how bad things will soon get outside. Han Feng waits for his medication, but the line feels endless. Across the room, he spots the stunning head nurse moving through the crowd, checking pulses and helping patients. She's such a dependable presence that the doctors and nurses gladly rely on her. Watching her work knocks the breath out of him. Han Feng is floored that someone so young already holds the title of head nurse. On top of that, she's gentle with every patient and absolutely adorable from head to toe. Yep, he's falling for someone new all over again. As he's lost in admiration, an elderly patient calls out for her help, and she hurries over. He complains of sudden back pain, but Jiyeon reminds him they're short-staffed and he'll have to wait a bit for treatment. The old creep's real agenda, though, is to take advantage of her. He slyly slides a camera near her legs to snap a photo while she's distracted. She reassures him she'll arrange an x-ray once things settle down. But the sleazy man doesn't stop there. He escalates, grabbing at her. Still unsuspecting, the kind nurse assures him a doctor will arrive soon to examine him properly. Then the geezer takes it further, brazenly groping the hospital's finest bakery. Before he can push things any further, Han Feng hurls his crutch straight at the man's face, knocking him to the floor. Alarmed, the nurse asks if the old man is okay. Han Feng apologizes, claiming he doesn't really know how to handle a crutch, sure, because the logical reaction to confusion is to launch it full force at someone. He crouches as if checking the man's phone. The old pervert shouts for him to stop. Han Feng catches a glimpse of the photos and his entire gallery, which makes him furious. He can't believe this creep dared not only to photograph the nurse but to lay hands on her. Han Feng confronts him, threatening to summon security and have him hauled away, one less disgusting patient causing trouble. He even refuses to give the phone back, warning he'll expose the guy online if he ever tries this again. Powerless to fight back, the old man bolts in a rage. Amazing how someone with back pain suddenly sprints out faster than a track star. Even the head nurse is stunned by his speed. Meanwhile, Han Feng shakes his head, thinking some people are beyond naive. He shows her the incriminating photo, explaining the creep's intentions. Han Feng leaves the next steps up to her. He even hands over the phone so she can report it to the police. Jiyeon is grateful but curious. Wasn't his ankle supposed to be injured? That question snaps him back to reality. Yes, his leg is fractured and the adrenaline is finally wearing off, sending a sharp wave of pain through him. Soon after, she makes sure his bandages are properly secured. Han Feng relaxes a bit as the pain subsides. The head nurse thanks him sincerely and promises not to let anyone exploit her again. But as she speaks, his foot somehow ends up pressed right into her two personalities. Han Feng can only think that this girl might never truly catch on. Jiyeon gets called away once more, rushing off with a reminder for him to come back in a week for a full checkup. Han Feng silently notes that sadly, he'll never see her again because of what's coming in a week. He walks out carrying that heavy thought. By the next day, the weather turns even more brutal. News outlets blast reports of plunging temperatures and massive snowfalls worldwide. Even places like Dubai and Egypt are seeing heavy snow, completely unheard of. Experts from 46 countries gather in Russia for an emergency meeting to figure out what's happening. These experts insist the extreme cold is temporary and will break within days. Citizens are urged to stay indoors and follow safety measures. Meanwhile, Han Feng relaxes in his custom-warmed room, heater blazing with nothing to fear. The broadcasts keep claiming the crisis will pass, but he knows better. It's all a lie to keep the public calm, a sham he fell for once but never again. This time is different. He's fully prepared with supplies stocked and the heat system humming. For now, nothing can bother him. In the building's group chat, residents rant about the worsening cold and how hard it is to stay warm. Then an anonymous user drops a bombshell. The Ice Age apocalypse is starting and the storm is coming from within the planet itself. The message shocks Han Feng. No one else should have this knowledge yet. His mind instantly flags this mysterious poster as someone to watch. After all, as the protagonist, Han Feng was supposed to be the only one aware of the looming apocalypse. The once happy residents now resemble a restless mob tagging management to fix the snow chaos, and reading their endless complaints is mind-numbingly dull. The group chat morphs into a chaotic carnival of chibi cat avatars. Angry neighbors fume that if the snow keeps blocking the exits, they can't even shop for food. They paid premium prices for this complex and expect better. Some threaten to confront the property manager if things don't improve. The management team panics, sending wave after wave of apologies. But hollow apologies don't calm residents demanding refunds, fed up with lousy service. Amid the uproar, Han Feng scowls, annoyed by people wasting energy on arguments, as if management could magically stop the blizzard. Yet not everyone has lost hope. Resident Jianjoy Yu wisely suggests they help one another instead of making things worse. After all, natural disasters are beyond the property team's control, so blaming them is pointless. Still, others aren't having it. They mock Jian for supposedly defending management. Jian insists he's neutral, just realistic. Cornering management achieves nothing. But the crowd won't settle unless someone clears the snow so they can buy groceries. No one wants to starve. Qin tries to reason with them, pointing out that clearing the sidewalks is more feasible than clearing the roads, and walking to the store might be their best option. Meanwhile, Han Feng notices the self-styled guru preaching to everyone, his expression sour. The way Han Feng glares makes it clear they have history. Then another irritated resident barges into the chat. No polite intro, he bluntly says if people want to eat, they need to start shoveling the roads themselves because arguing won't melt snow. Then he signs off. Another volunteer chimes in, ready to help clear the mess outside. This tough talker also happens to be someone Han Feng recognizes. Gradually, more residents join the snow clearing effort. Even the daintiest neighbors pitch in. Among them is the unforgettable Hyona, eager to participate. Han Feng doubts someone like her would ever volunteer willingly. Turns out, she's just using it as bait to lure admirers who won't let a pretty face do heavy labor. Sure enough, she lets others handle the work while she enjoys the attention, classic opportunist. Annoyed, Han Feng logs off the chat. His frustration with her antics is obvious. She never fails to ruin his mood. And now she's messaging him directly. Why? Because she knows he's a reliable sap who might bring her supplies. She even attaches a provocative photo. Bare legs, thick thighs, barely any clothes aimed straight at him. Han Feng gives her a mental 10 out of 10 for effort, flaunting so much skin despite the freezing cold. But with a busted leg, he can't chase anything anyway, so he fires back a playful jab guaranteed to rile her up. And it works, she's so irritated she could stomp him flat. Quick flashback, this is the third day since the blizzard began, temperatures already plunging past -20. Central heating still runs for now. And the internet is up, letting everyone indulge in their daily online distractions like bored teens everywhere. Han Feng spends the time mindlessly scrolling TikTok, watching endless clips of busty influencers flaunting short reels. But honestly, nothing excites him. It's only day 2 of this so-called apocalypse and he's already restless, wondering how badly loneliness can mess with a person's mind. The broken leg only makes it worse, killing his vibe and keeping him stuck indoors. It'll be months before he's back to normal, so he just keeps binging videos. That's when a jaw-dropping news segment grabs his attention. A man supposedly has a self-healing ability. Doctors claim this guy fell from the 15th floor, destroying his organs and shattering bones. Yet before long, his body began regenerating, actually repairing itself. Hearing about supernatural healing triggers a thought in Han Feng. He remembers he's got his own strange abilities, so he focuses. He calls up that familiar green glow over his hand and tries to mend his fractured leg, but the green energy sputters out without doing anything. He tries again, still nothing. Failure greets him every time. Finally, he gives up, sinking into the couch, frustrated that his hopes spiked for nothing. Hours of endless scrolling follow, until he finally drifts towards sleep. In his dream, he's wearing rough, primitive clothing, riding a gigantic goat, actually a whole flock of flying goats with their heads bobbing as they soar beside him. From a wide view, a massive herd trails close behind. But suddenly the fun ends when his goat slams to a stop, flinging him off. He lands hard and injures his leg. One goat steps forward and starts licking the wound. Grossed out by the strange goat kindness, he shoves it away, which only irritates the animal. Then the goat lashes out an absurdly long tongue, coils it around Han Feng's leg, and yanks it upward into the air. The spot wrapped in that tongue begins healing instantly. At that exact moment, Han Feng jolts awake in a cold sweat. Completely rattled, that bizarre dream has him sweating down to his core. He suddenly notices his leg glowing green, showing clear signs of mending itself. Carefully, he peels off the bandages, sets his foot on the floor, and to his shock feels no pain at all. Looks like the green energy finally worked, but only while he was asleep. To test this strange discovery, he grabs a sharp knife with the dark idea of wounding himself to trigger the power again. His hand shakes as he hesitates, then finally makes a tiny cut on his index finger, hoping to see his newfound ability in action. Meanwhile outside, the once angry residents are now putting their effort to good use. Together, they've cleared the snow blocking the main gate. Credit goes to Zhang for his motivating speech that rallied everyone. Zhang even praises an old man who worked harder than anyone. The old man returns the compliment to the twins who hustled just as much. And there's the ever-favorite nurse Jiyeon, carefully navigating the slick snow until she slips, prompting the twins to rush over and help her up. They steady her, then head back to clearing more snow, telling her to call if she needs another hand. The twins resume shoveling to extend the cleared path. Jing notices the snowfall growing heavier and urges everyone to make their grocery run quick so they can return fast. Talking about supplies jogs the old man's memory. He almost keeps it to himself, but Zhang presses him to share. The old man recalls a rumor from a few days back. Someone was spotted hauling supplies on a small truck, pretending to be a new tenant. Zhang shrugs it off as normal. New residents often bring plenty of belongings when they move in. But the old man adds a crucial twist. He saw the newcomer carrying gas tanks and even a fireplace, definitely not typical moving gear. The guy looked like he was prepping seriously for a long winter. Before they can debate it further, the twins return with a progress update. Out of nowhere, a man who's been eavesdropping pops up, curious about this hardcore prepper. But he immediately gets pegged with a snowball from Liu Yan, who scolds him for slacking and tells him to get back to work. Zhang steps in, breaking up the chatter and announcing the path is finally clear so everyone can move out. Nurse Jin is excited to head to the store herself. Meanwhile, the old man quietly asks Jiang if he thinks that mysterious resident somehow knew the blizzard was coming. Jiang pauses, then carefully sidesteps the question. He simply says the storm will blow over soon, so there's no reason to worry. Worst case, if the storm lingers, at least they have a well-stocked neighbor to help them survive. So overall, it might even be a good thing. As their grocery trek continues, the snowfall intensifies, urging everyone to pick up the pace. Back at Han Feng's apartment, the lazy guy is still snoozing peacefully in his warm hideout, but his nap is cut short by a knock at the door and a familiar voice calling his name. He opens it to find Homeless Joe delivering the special goods Han Feng requested. This package is a promised favor from Boss Liu. Brother Liu agreed to drop it off because he had stocked up early and didn't need to scramble for supplies like everyone else. Even so, Han Feng is thankful he braved the storm to deliver it. Brother Liu also brings some juicy gossip about new rumors making the rounds. Apparently, last night someone completely emptied a supermarket in the Eastern District. When Boss Liu's team reached it after clearing the snow, the place was already wiped clean. Han Feng finds it hard to believe anyone could clear out such a huge store overnight. Yet Brother Liu is certain it happened. Han Feng realizes something even stranger than his past life might be unfolding. He might not be the only one with supernatural abilities. His thoughts are interrupted as Brother Liu advises him to dress warmly and stay cautious. After that warning, Brother Liu heads out, leaving Han Feng alone to think. He sits and puzzles over how someone could empty a supermarket in just one night. The only explanation he can imagine is someone with a power straight out of comics. Maybe a personal subspace to stash unlimited goods. Could people like that really exist? The answer seems obvious. If he has powers, someone else could too. That realization shakes him. He knows he must study his own abilities carefully so he's ready to face other superpowered individuals. He needs to know his strengths, weaknesses, and limits. Determined, he opens his diary. He begins reviewing everything he already understands about his powers. So far, he's learned his ability interacts with different foods, both plant and animal. With it, he can speed up growth in large portions, even cook food, though it tastes awful. Unfortunately, there are big limitations. The success rate varies a lot depending on the ingredient. For example, soybeans have only a 10% chance to sprout, and meat is even worse. Han Feng can't figure out why. Suddenly, a soybean burst in his hand, releasing a nasty green puff. Instead of a healthy plant, he's left holding a stinky rock. The high failure rate frustrates him, so he vows to master his ability through relentless practice. After all, nothing improves a skill faster than hard work, so he trains late into the night. At last, success. A fresh soybean plant with full pods grows in his hand. The victory isn't easy. He's drenched in sweat, turning himself into a human heater for the apartment. But the effort pays off as he uncovers key techniques to boost success. He discovers the green energy isn't steady. Each food requires a different duration of energy depending on its nutrients. Miss the ideal timing and you're left with a burnt, smelly stone, Precision is everything. That challenge reminds Han Feng of something familiar, a popular rhythm-based music game from a decade ago, where you had to hit the perfect beat at exactly the right moment. It was possible to imagine the energy's value as if it followed the four directions: up, down, left, and right. The amount of energy fed into the object had to stay precise every single second, and at some critical instant the process needed to be halted. Nail that timing and you'd succeed, letting every soybean sprout into a healthy plant. After mastering plants, Han Feng naturally moved on to meat experiments, but meat was a different beast compared to vegetables. One misstep and the meat would collapse into a revolting black sludge. Still, the core principle of transforming meat was supposed to be roughly the same. Step 1 was to figure out exactly how much energy the meat demanded. Everything seemed fine, everything appeared on track until the snag hit. The chicken leg burst apart just like the earlier attempts, spewing vile black muck. Clearly, working with meat was going to take far more time than cultivating plants. Over and over, Han Feng failed. Chicken legs detonated one after another, a maddening chain of disasters. At last his patience snapped and he shouted in frustration, cursing the absurd difficulty. Yet giving up wasn't in his nature. While snow outside the window thickened and the temperature plunged even lower, Han Feng kept at it. Evidence of his struggle was scattered all across the kitchen. Finally came the decisive moment, the last chicken leg. He moved automatically now, face blank, expecting nothing. Up, down, left, right, red energy, green energy. It felt like some overly complicated microgame. Each time he slipped, he had to reset and begin again, tension wound to its limit. In this round, Han Feng pulled it off. He managed to expand the chicken leg to a massive size. With a dismissive snort, he muttered that the ordeal had been worth it. Then he collapsed onto the floor, drained but satisfied. At last, he had cracked the secret to synthesizing meat. Outside, the weather worsened by the hour. The news announced that July 17 marked the third straight day of catastrophic snowfall. Across the nation, the same disaster unfolded, a once-in-millennia calamity. To keep citizens alive, the authorities were scrambling to counter the damage and offer aid. Han Feng awoke the next morning to those grim reports. How many times had he heard this before? Hollow reassurances that the blizzard had crippled transport, power, and the internet, but repairs were coming soon and relief supplies would arrive shortly. The anchor closed by urging everyone to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. None of this surprised Han Feng. He'd heard it all in his previous life. Suddenly his phone buzzed with a notification, then several more. A group chat of building residents had erupted again. Unable to resist, he opened it. The chat was a frenzy. Some trusted the rescuers would come, others dismissed the promises and plotted their own survival. Only one avatar cut through the noise, asking the gullible if they really believed the broadcast. It was old Uncle Liu, who flatly rejected the TV narrative. If the government truly had control, rescue teams would have been here already. Instead, he'd heard whispers from friends that armored vehicles, tanks, and heavy weapons were being gathered in City A, the nation's capital. They were likely preparing for an impending war. The possibility of full-scale conflict with some unknown foe sent a cold hush through the paranoid chat group. Then panic broke out, people demanding to know if Uncle Liu's story was real. If it was, weren't they all doomed? Meanwhile, Han Feng was intrigued. He remembered hearing of such events in his last life. Mr. Zhang stepped in to calm everyone, saying that if Uncle Liu was right, they needed survival measures to protect the community. Some neighbors were already running out of essentials. With government help uncertain, Mr. Zhang suggested organizing aid for those in need. He urged residents with extra supplies to share and pledged half his own stockpile as an example. Others began murmuring about the proposal in low voices. One man agreed enthusiastically, vowing to donate and even roping in Li Hyona. She knew that bold guy, Wu Kuan-yu, still trying to embarrass her because she'd once turned him down. So Li Hyona played the shy card, apologizing that she had no extra goods, and her admirers quickly leapt to defend her. The drama nearly derailed the plan, as they couldn't even unite over basic charity. But eventually donations trickled in. Moved by Mr. Zhang's speech, people offered food, clothes, medicine, everything necessary. Mr. Zhang thanked all the contributors and, since the crowd was large, suggested appointing coordinators. Naturally, he would lead the team, an interim emergency committee to manage and distribute the donations. Han Feng smirked when he read that. In his past life, the same committee had turned out to be a scheme to seize others' supplies. By July 19, the fifth day of the apocalypse, temperatures had plunged to minus 40 degrees. That was the day the building's central heating finally failed under the brutal cold. Residents scrambled for ways to stay warm without their heaters. Some lit tiny indoor fires just as they had in the previous timeline. It was awful now and only getting worse. Han Feng, of course, was an exception, stocked with failed experimental charcoal perfect for his fireplace. On his table sat a fizzy iced cola and a decadent slice of strawberry cake. He did what any of us might do in his place, kicked back with single-player video games, ignoring the chaos outside. But his peace was cut short by a sudden phone call. Pausing his game, he answered while sipping Coke. It was the Block 8 coordinator, saying they planned to clear the roads in 20 minutes and needed help in the basement car park. Han Feng bit back a curse. These people still didn't get it, the snow wasn't stopping. Still, he chose to leave his warm haven and head to the lobby. Better to avoid conflict with neighbors and keep his secrets hidden. One glance at the gate showed the building was completely buried in snow. Other volunteers fumed. The paths they'd cleared were already swallowed by towering drifts. Hoping at least to crack open the door, they called Han Feng over to help. They braced themselves, pushing on the count of 3. To everyone's shock, the doorway burst open to a torrent of snow and the biting blast of a raging blizzard. The storm's ferocity made it impossible to keep eyes open without pain. Han Feng regretted abandoning his cozy couch for frostbite and pointless labor. Anyone stepping outside now risked death. The rest quickly reached the same conclusion: only a fool would venture out. And speaking of fools, a familiar voice suddenly rang in Han Feng's ear. It was none other than Homeless Joe, better known as Brother Li, mocking everyone for cowardice when they should be tough. The volunteers trembled as they tried to talk him down, but Brother Li was built different. He crushed his cigarette in a single drag. Then, pumped like a madman, he dove into the snow, blocking the doorway with his body. Shouting like an anime hero, he literally punched the snow, scattering drifts everywhere, and kept at it. He even carved out a man-sized tunnel before silence fell. Moments later, muffled cries for help came from beneath the mound. They yanked Brother Li out, his face purple from cold and the crushing snow. The volunteers finally conceded that going outside was impossible and shut the gate. Han Feng rushed over to check if the reckless gangster was okay. He suggested everyone head to the car park to find the attendance coordinator and wait out the storm. With a blizzard of this magnitude, manpower alone couldn't solve the crisis. Down in the underground car park, the air felt slightly warmer. Mr. Zhang, the de facto leader, was again surrounded by owners. After hearing the lobby report, he agreed to pause clearing operations and designated the car park as the donation hub. Han Feng kept to the background. This was his first real look at the man named Zhang from the chat. This was the very guy who would later twist the committee into a scam, using smooth talk and a polite facade to exploit everyone's trust. Mr. Zhang spoke about the overwhelming generosity of the donations pouring in. He said these gifts would aid those in trouble and expressed heartfelt thanks. The atmosphere in the car park turned upbeat. People felt united and noble, working towards survival. But Han Feng knew better. As the endless disaster dragged on, they would regret surrendering their supplies. Brother Li, still shivering from his stunt, decided to head upstairs and bid Han Feng goodbye. Scanning the crowd, Han Feng noticed someone striking. It was the bubbly nurse he'd met when he broke his leg, now in a cute winter onesie and awkwardly balancing a stack of boxes while weaving through the committee crowd. Predictably, her clumsiness made her bump into a few people. She would have toppled if Han Feng hadn't stepped in, catching both her and the boxes. He asked if she was all right as she blushed. Opening her eyes, she thanked him and soon recognized him from the hospital. Then she recalled that his leg was supposed to be badly injured. How could he be catching falling nurses? Realizing his slip, Han Feng scrambled for an explanation. He stammered that he'd always healed quickly since childhood. The nervous gestures made it sound unconvincing. Luckily, the nurse was too innocent to doubt him, simply marveling at his speedy recovery. Han Feng offered to carry her boxes. She hesitated, saying they were heavy, but he insisted until she let him help. The weight shocked him the moment he lifted them. Curious, he asked what was inside, and she explained they were mostly medical supplies for donation. She admitted they were a bit too heavy and said she could manage, but he continued to help. Captivated by her kindness and charm, Han Feng would have carried twice the load without complaint. Since she insisted she was stronger than most men, the nurse kept cautioning him not to overexert himself. When he asked if she'd always had that kind of strength, she grew slightly guarded and hinted there was a reason for it. Those cryptic words naturally sparked Han Feng's curiosity, but she quickly looked uneasy, apologized for mentioning it, and admitted something had happened recently that she couldn't quite explain. As they walked and talked, she suddenly realized she still didn't know his name. Han Feng courteously introduced himself. The radiant nurse responded with her own Jin Shui, and her bright smile showed she truly enjoyed this unexpected meeting. That dazzling smile left him momentarily speechless. He might have been on the verge of winning her over, but then she asked what he did for work. Han Feng answered honestly that he was unemployed. Talk about fumbling at the finish line. Luckily, in true Manhwa fashion, an impatient passerby bumped into Nurse Jin and threw her off balance. Struggling to steady herself, she ended up falling toward Han Feng, the only person nearby to grab onto. In the process, her soft chest pressed against his arm without warning. With absolutely no smooth moves, Han Feng just froze and savored the accidental contact. Jin quickly pulled back, apologizing, while he tried to assure her it wasn't a big deal. The almost perfect encounter was cut short when Lee Hyona appeared like a sleepless zombie, hunger and cold clearly wearing her down. Acting like a parasite, the witch clung to Han Feng, deliberately pressing her chest against his arm and slyly asking who the pink-haired woman was and if she was his friend. Nurse Jin grew awkward and swiftly took the boxes of supplies back from Han Feng, eager to log her donations and avoid intruding on what seemed like a private conversation. Han Feng asked why Hyona had come downstairs, all while watching Nurse Jin hurry off to the donation desk with regret. The witch explained she needed supplies and claimed she was worried about him since he hadn't been active lately. Scratching his head, he replied that he'd been about to send her a message. She called him a liar, pointing out he'd been happily chatting with another woman moments ago. Then she pried about whether he had extra food, saying she was almost out and wondering if he could spare any. Instead of getting angry, he simply smirked. Keeping up his playful act, Han Feng said he didn't have much either but could share a little, though only with someone who actually responds to messages. Boldly, he slipped an arm around her waist and asked if she'd like to stay at his place for a few days. Not used to this more confident version of her usual pushover, Hyona faltered for a moment. She pushed him back with a smile, insisting they could just chat online if he wanted to talk. Taking that as a clear rejection, Han Feng turned to head home. Desperate, she grabbed his sleeve before he got far, saying he seemed different lately and claiming she'd always been serious about her feelings. With the most convincing puppy eyes imaginable, Hyona said she didn't want anyone thinking she was with him just for his money and needed more time for something real. Han Feng blushed at her performance. Thankfully, he caught himself. If he hadn't already died once by her hand, he might have believed her, but now he just wanted to rip off her pretty mask. He still didn't know who the man behind the witch was. Thinking it over, why bother hunting the guy down when he could simply follow the same path as in his previous life until Hyona brought the man to him. This time he'd be ready. She might have a steel bat, but Han Feng had a sniper rifle. With that in mind, he decided not to stir things up and joked that he was only teasing her. The witch felt a flicker of embarrassment for putting on such a dramatic act over a joke. Han Feng assured her he'd wait for her message so he could drop off some food the next day. They finally parted ways, she even telling him to reach out if he wanted to talk. As she left the car park, an evil little smile curled on her lips. But she had no idea Han Feng wasn't the one being played this time. He was enjoying tormenting her quietly. 2 days slipped by without Han Feng contacting her. That silence made Lee Hyona blow up his phone with angry texts about the promised supplies. Han Feng just let the salty messages pile up while he enjoyed a sizzling steak and a fizzy drink. How sweet it felt to feast while teasing the witch who'd killed him in a past life. Perfecting the method to create mouthwatering meat had been a game changer. With the freezing weather outside and cozy warmth inside, he was even sweating in his bathrobe, absolute legend. Not that he'd only been lounging these past days. He'd run countless experiments and confirmed 2 vital facts. First, meat couldn't be grown endlessly in one shot. Second, like soybeans, it could still be reproduced without limit. He'd already produced pounds of it. For each full stalk of beans he grew, he used half to plant more and ate the rest. He could now do the same with meat. Under the red and green energy, half a steak plus a handful of soybeans could yield a whole fresh steak. Repeating the cycle would create an endless supply of meat. After many trials, he concluded he'd never need to worry about good meals again. Meanwhile, TV reporters were still braving the elements to document the unprecedented blizzard on its 19th day. It was now August 2nd, and even the Maldives near the equator were averaging a shocking negative 42 degrees. The islands were buried under ice and snow. Even the ocean was freezing at a speed visible to the naked eye, with ice layers already 55 centimeters thick. Similar conditions struck other supposed warm regions. Watching from his massive entertainment center, Han Feng scoffed at the news, knowing reality was far worse than the media showed, all while sipping his daily red wine. Then a sudden noise outside jolted him. Rushing to the window, he yanked the curtains open to see a building blazing in the distance, the 7th explosion in recent days. Even Han Feng couldn't guess the cause, but it was clearly bad news. Military helicopter activity in the city had also increased noticeably. If he was in the dark, so was every other survivor. Panic spread among residents, many now camping in the basement car park to barter for food and goods. Human greed had no limits, and plenty were exploiting others, sparking frequent conflicts. At the center of it all stood Mr. Zhang, still playing the dependable leader, handing out resources to the needy free of charge. On this particular day, Han Feng decided to join the others in the basement. Just minutes out of his warm home, the biting cold was already brutal. Every time he left his cozy apartment, he instantly regretted it. His real purpose was to gather valuable intel, Otherwise, he'd have avoided these people entirely. From past memory, he recalled a rebellion starting here. At the moment, they were still keeping their promise to share resources instead of scamming. To see the truth for himself, Han Feng decided to play detective amid the chaos. The long lines at the collection point showed just how many households were already running low. At the front, a man argued bitterly that he'd donated several large boxes but was receiving only a tiny share, while Mr. Zhang insisted everyone was treated equally. Holding just one canned item and a single sausage, the man demanded his donations back, but the committee wouldn't budge. Mr. Zhang urged him to look at the bigger picture and promised to repay him in cash several times over once things settled. But money for an uncertain future meant little now. Soon others in line turned on the complainer, scolding him to stop being shameless and move on. A mob mentality took over, everyone siding with the committee and mocking the man who simply wanted enough food for his family. Han Feng knew full well the leaders would never release extra supplies in a crisis like this. But he also knew that standing on moral high ground while hoarding donations was equally shameless. Speaking of shameless, the infamous figure finally made another entrance. It was none other than homeless Joe, Brother Li, looking far worse than before, frail and gaunt. It had been some time since the Gun brothers had crossed paths. Brother Li claimed he was doing fine, but it was obvious he was. He said his shaking was from being flustered and cold, but he was clearly suffering. He finally confessed he'd been surviving on nothing but water, with no food left. Back when the donation drive was bustling, he'd given most of his supplies to the committee, and now his own stash was gone before the endless storm ended. The rations handed out were meager. Had he known the weather would be this relentless, he'd have saved more for himself. Sensing a solution, Han Feng leaned in to whisper a proposal. Brother Li pulled back in shock when Han Feng quietly offered him 4 packs of instant noodles and 2 sausages for a simple job, emphasizing it would cut deep into his own reserves. The gangster mistook it for pure generosity, moved to tears and promising to remember the kindness forever. He clasped Han Feng's shoulder with heartfelt gratitude, assuring him the small task would be handled. As for the food, he'd swing by Han Feng's place later. First, though, Brother Li needed to eat something and went a queue for rations. Han Feng felt satisfied with the neat deal. Just a few packs of noodles and sausages, and he wouldn't need to risk coming down here for intel again. He did feel a twinge of pity for Brother Lei, but lounging on his sofa with good food and games was far more appealing. The trip would have been flawless if not for another all-too-familiar face spotting him. Someone called his name, and before he knew it, a hand smacked across his cheek. Li Hiona's greeting of the day. Blindsided by the slap, he froze, stunned by the absurdity. Eyes blazing, Hiona scolded him for being a disappointment, loudly berating him for ignoring her requests for food. She made sure everyone nearby could hear her tirade. Han Feng stood there, stunned and speechless. The witch he'd been toying with had just slapped him in front of everyone. He hadn't even settled the score for what she'd done in his past life, and now she dared to strike him. Outrage boiled within him. Clearly, Li Hiona still saw him as the easy-to-bully weakling from before. He stayed silent for a few moments as she ranted, calling him deaf and demanding an answer. Han Feng drew in a deep breath, misting the cold air. Then he slipped into character, offering a sincere-sounding apology and explaining that his supplies had been stolen. He claimed he'd left the food outside his door for a moment to grab his keys, only to find it gone when he returned. He even said he'd searched for clues but found nothing. She looked desperate, like an addict craving her next fix, as she asked if he had any hidden stash left. He replied that he had only enough to last a few days if rationed to 1 meal a day. Hearing that he still had some food, Hiona's face lit up in a blush as she seamlessly shifted back to her sweet girl act. When she suggested that Han Feng divide his rations in half and survive on 1 meal every 2 days so they could both endure the crisis, she looked completely unhinged. Han Feng could barely stomach how brazen this woman was. The ability to utter such selfish demands without a flicker of shame was downright chilling. In her mind, he was still nothing more than a convenient tool to exploit whenever she pleased. Choosing to let her believe that delusion, Han Feng simply smiled and sweetly agreed to her outrageous plan. He played the part of a dependable guy willing to share his supplies evenly with a random girl. When she insisted on getting the food right away, he smoothly postponed the drop-off until nightfall, saying he needed time to pack. She playfully replied that she'd be waiting for his message, and as she left first, wished him well and told him not to catch the flu that was going around. Han Feng waved her off with a pleasant goodbye, already plotting something devious in that petty brain of his. By 8 o'clock that evening, Li Hiona was already bombarding Han Feng with messages about the promised food. Her impatience drove her to the lobby near his apartment around 9:30, where she stood shivering alone in the freezing hallway. Han Feng, meanwhile, was enjoying his favorite pastime, dangling the bait and then ghosting her calls and texts completely. The elevator had been out of service for weeks thanks to the relentless cold. That meant if she truly wanted to confront him, she'd have to climb the stairs all the way up to his floor. With no other option, Lee Hyona swallowed her pride and started the creepy staircase ascent. Halfway up, she was already worn out, the icy air making her tremble. The climb felt like torture, and if not for the hope of food, she never would have attempted it. Her exhaustion mounted with every step. Days of near starvation had drained nearly all her strength. Credit where it's due, few people would trek more than 16 floors in this blizzard just to mooch a meal. To make matters worse, the emergency lights on the upper floors were dead. That left her trudging upward in a pitch-black, eerily silent stairwell. When she thought she heard a strange noise above, Lee Hyona nervously called out, asking who was there. Her answer came in the form of a black plastic bag dropping from higher up, aimed straight for her head. Shock froze her in place, forcing her to stand and wait for the bag's inevitable impact. The moment it hit with a loud thud, the emergency lights flickered back on as white dust exploded through the stairwell. The ever-smiling Lee Hyona was now covered head to toe in flour. Standing before her was Han Feng, claiming he'd fallen asleep and rushed down with supplies when he saw her messages, only to accidentally drop the flour bag when the lights went out. Brushing flour and plastic from her hair and coat, Hyona looked disgusted, her true nasty demeanor starting to peek through the cracks. Han Feng, on the other hand, was delighted by the sight. He'd orchestrated this cruel prank perfectly, and he wasn't finished yet. Hoisting another plastic bag, he told the witch he'd packed the rest of his provisions just for her. A quick glance revealed that most of it was already spoiled and moldy, more garbage than actual food. Pretending innocence, Han Feng scratched his head and said he'd worked extra hard to save those leftovers, even tossing in some rotting meat. Then he shifted to mock offense, yanking the bag back and saying she could return it if she didn't appreciate his effort. Desperate to avoid another day of hunger, the witch snatched the bag back, insisting she wanted it. Han Feng gave her a slow, deliberate once-over and quietly scoffed at himself. Before him stood the so-called goddess he'd once chased with everything he had. Now she resembled a homeless addict on a freezing winter night, digging through a moldy sack in search of scraps. She even grabbed the remaining bag of flour straight from his hand with greedy urgency. Lee Hyona actually celebrated half a bag of flour, unfazed by the fact she'd just been showered in it. Without a word of thanks or a proper goodbye, she turned and hurried off, while Han Feng remained unbothered. Giving her literal garbage should be enough to give the witch a stomachache for days. Bathing was out of the question in this weather, meaning she'd have to wander around with flour caked to her skin for quite some time. Cheerfully, Han Feng headed back toward his own place. But as he walked, a strange feeling crept over him. He brushed it off outwardly, yet sensed movement behind him. Staying alert, Han Feng continued acting casual as he approached his door. He left the stairwell and walked as though nothing was amiss, even as a shadowed figure followed a few steps behind. From the sound of crunching snow boots, it was clearly a person tailing him. Taking advantage of the element of surprise, Han Feng ducked behind the door and suddenly pounced on the figure. He gripped the mysterious stalker firmly and forced them down to the floor. Just as he drew back a fist to land a punch, something made him hesitate, his aggression fading. The pursuer turned out to be a young woman with disheveled hair, sleepy eyes, and comically thick glasses. What on earth was this about? Han Feng could think of only one explanation for her late-night presence. She'd been spying on him, and he intended to find out why. But all he got was silence and a blank stare from behind those oversized lenses. Clearly, this girl wasn't much of a talker. With not a word from her, Han Feng, intrigued and slightly irritated, decided to apply a bit more pressure to get an answer. He coldly threatened to strip off her coat right there in the freezing hallway if she refused to speak. Yet even that threat failed to draw a single word from her, and Han Feng finally grew bored of toying with the girl, deciding to let her slip away this time. Still, he warned that next time she might not be so lucky if she kept snooping, and she'd better hurry home before the cold night bit harder. Just as our protagonist turned to leave, a gentle tug on his sleeve stopped him in his tracks. The quiet stranger clearly wasn't ready to release him, though Han Feng had no clue what she was after. She only stared at him in total silence, prompting Han Feng to snap that she should quit gawking and either speak up or get lost. Instead of a reply, she slowly lifted her hand and pointed towards something unseen. Without a word, she pulled him along, and even a slowpoke like Han Feng realized she meant to show him something. Their steps led straight to her own room. Inside, the warmth and brightness caught him off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless. His eyes swept over stacks of supply boxes. Some were empty and trash littered the floor, yet the sheer amount of provisions she still had after weeks of apocalypse was astonishing. Had she somehow prepared in advance? Han Feng asked bluntly whether she'd known beforehand about the coming ice catastrophe, and to his surprise, she finally opened her mouth. She explained in a peculiar way that she had done her own calculations and predicted an approaching ice age. So she was the mysterious poster who'd been warning the community chat about the frozen doom before it struck. Han Feng, of course, couldn't wrap his head around the idea that research in math could forecast the future without any rebirth powers. But he sensed she hadn't brought him here just to brag about her forecasts. He was right, her true motives soon became clear. Multiple screens flickered across the room, each filled with CCTV footage. Every monitor featured Han Feng himself. One clip showed him picking his nose while hauling boxes in an elevator. Another displayed a delivery worker carrying a dozen gas cans into his apartment. A third captured Brother Lee delivering a gun case, and the list went on. His first impression of her had been dead on. She'd indeed been secretly watching him for a long while. Now completely at ease, she casually began changing clothes right there, the room too warm for heavy winter wear. Han Feng fumbled, misunderstanding, and asked why she was undressing in front of him. She simply said it was hot, though he clearly meant something else. Flustered, he demanded she stop immediately and pull her pants back on. Eventually, despite his protests, he had to shrug off his own coat too. This girl held dangerous information, and until he sorted things out, he couldn't just leave. Summarizing what he'd gathered, Han Feng realized she'd been monitoring him because his early stockpiling had raised her suspicions. Luckily, she wasn't planning blackmail. She merely wanted to see if he was clever enough to work with. Now he just needed to understand what kind of cooperation she meant. Conversation clearly wasn't her strength, so she opted to demonstrate instead, letting Han Feng piece things together himself. He couldn't even guess what she intended as she moved about. Then she surprised him by pulling a generator from behind the bed. Definitely not what his mind had imagined. She simply wanted him to teach her how to operate it. Though a wizard with computers and books, she lacked the everyday survival know-how. After a bit of instruction, the generator hummed steadily. Let's just pretend it was hydrogen-powered and safe enough indoors. Han Feng hoped that would be the end of her requests, but he was mistaken. Her clear blue eyes once again pleaded for more assistance. This time she needed help with the hot water boiler. Our hero quickly set it up, ensuring she'd have warm water around the clock thanks to the generator. Still, he reminded her to conserve water and close the tap. Next, she dragged him to the refrigerator, which was a disaster. He had to explain that raw meat belongs in the freezer or it spoils and that she must keep things clean or risk illness. He refused to handle all the chores for her. She had to repeat every step herself. Han Feng marveled that she'd survived this long while knowing so little. He even demonstrated how to change and attach gas canisters to the stove, drilling safety rules into her head. The lessons kept coming as he taught her to cook and roast food over a fire. At last, completely drained, Han Feng watched a delicious meal come together. He urged her to eat it while it was still steaming hot. He couldn't believe his own life, spending the entire day babysitting an adult who acted like a child. Her basic self-sufficiency was practically zero. She, on the other hand, showed no embarrassment and simply enjoyed the tasty dinner. Han Feng awkwardly joked about the situation, though he doubted she understood the comment. Bone-tired, he longed only for the comfort of his warm bed. Turns out he wasn't the only exhausted one. When he glanced over, she was already fast asleep. She'd even nodded off at the table, the feast still in front of her. It was the first time Han Feng had ever seen someone fall asleep mid-meal. Gently, he carried her to the bed. Who would have guessed he'd spend an entire day tutoring someone who acted like a little kid? Through the night, the snowfall grew heavier and the temperature plunged even further. When Han Feng woke the next morning, visitors were already demanding his attention. It was the same girl again, arriving with gifts to thank him for his help. Even he was startled by how generous the haul was. After he took the boxes, she remained at the door, clearly not done. He recognized that look and knew she had another favor in mind. Sure enough, she'd lugged in a generator and asked for another lesson, proving she hadn't fully absorbed yesterday's instructions. Han Feng had to begin everything from scratch. After several days of chatting with the girl, he figured out she was utterly clueless about survival. She also lacked the most basic common sense and had no grasp of what was proper or not. Yet she refused to quit, dragging Han Feng to her room each day so he could drill her in survival tactics and daily living skills. Eventually, she managed to cook something barely passable as food, which Han Feng still considered progress. Before this, even stray dogs would have turned their noses up at her attempts, but in an ice apocalypse, people would queue for such a meal. After all that time, Han Feng finally thought to ask the girl's name. She introduced herself as Jiao Xinggan. Han Feng still couldn't figure out why her speech was so odd or what her real deal was, but abandoning her wasn't an option. Meanwhile, down in the basement where supplies were being handed out to struggling residents, things were far from peaceful. Hungry neighbors clashed over the last scraps. Chaos took over as people snatched goods from each other, insisting no one could prove ownership. The weak slumped in despair while the strong grabbed more. The quiet days were clearly finished. Everyone was battling for resources they believed they deserved. They guarded their small halls fiercely, and any theft attempt exploded into wild violence. Fists flew and kicks landed without mercy until knuckles and shoes were smeared with blood. As society unraveled, Mr. Jiang stayed perfectly calm in the storm. He cranked the megaphone volume to maximum. The piercing screech forced everyone to cover their ears and halt the fight, like a sonic weapon from a supervillain. After a few seconds of that awful feedback, Mr. Jiang finally addressed the crowd, asking if they were done brawling. Hoisting one battered man up, he pointed out how foolish it was to risk death over a few supplies. Wasn't that pure madness? But the crowd still simmered with anger. They blamed Mr. Jiang for suggesting the donation system that left them with only a packet of noodles every few days. To them, it felt like starve or fight. Mr. Jiang acted as though he heard their complaints about the broken distribution system, then turned to his crew with a businesslike air. He declared that if they were willing to fight over such nonsense, maybe they deserved to starve. Then he asked who had really caused this mess and urged them to think. The restless crowd turned their blame on him. Picking up a lone piece of bread, he began his persuasive act, steering their thoughts back to the bigger picture. Bread once worth a few bucks now sold for tens or even hundreds to those with deep pockets. The rich bled the poor dry, slicing bread into 5 or 10 pieces to auction off. They profiteered off disaster, while the destitute in the basement garage had long run out of cash or goods. Yet here these people were, tearing each other apart over a system that once worked. They killed each other while the well-supplied elite hoarded and hiked prices without mercy. And still the starving poor kept fighting. Mr. Jiang asked if that seemed fair. Sensing the crowd hanging on his every word, Mr. Jiang urged them to stop and unite to reclaim the resources meant for all. The hungry, angry residents started to agree, convinced they were being cheated. Why, they wondered, should the wealthy enjoy every advantage while they struggled just to survive? Mr. Jiang watched with satisfaction as his carefully planted seed of resentment took root. Their rage and frustration shifted upward toward the richer apartment residents. The survivors believed they were only reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Observing the rising tension and chaos, Mr. Jiang allowed himself a quiet smirk. Amid the growing madness, homeless Joe, better known as Brother Lee, appeared. He alone saw through the slick speech. The crowd was losing its mind and something big was about to break. He needed to warn Han Feng immediately. Up in Han Feng's room, he lounged lazily, pretending to read while snoring until his phone rang. He read Brother Lee's texts about the escalating trouble in the basement garage. Thanks to Mr. Jung's non-stop agitation, the mob now planned to seize supplies from every apartment, breaking into homes. These raiders came armed and dangerous. Brother Liu urged Han Feng to hide and avoid them. Han Feng could only hope the homeless man stayed safe. He never imagined things would escalate this far. Though he owned 2 guns for emergencies, the idea of using them on people unsettled him. Worse, if the mob discovered his stash, they'd hunt him down like wild animals and pick his bones clean. So he had to brace for every possible scenario. He fetched wires, tools, and a couple of fire extinguishers from storage. With these, he began crudely wiring his doorknob with live current for defense. Once he finished the makeshift rig, Han Feng carefully laid the wire across the floor. His plan was abruptly cut short when the power died. Outside, the entire neighborhood had blacked out at once. Some tried contacting building management, but they'd lost touch long ago. Han Feng figured the snowstorm and people overusing heaters made the outage inevitable. On top of that, deep snow and deadly cold made repairs impossible. All signs pointed to this blackout and signal loss being permanent. And once everyone realized the power was gone for good, panic would spiral fast. Their fear would spark an even bigger uprising. Real hell was about to begin. Half an hour earlier, the witch Lee Hyona was slurping noodles with greedy delight. Her rich patron bragged about buying supplies at 50 times the normal price, while desperate sellers stayed silent. With only $500,000 spent, he'd stocked up and even auctioned goods so the poor fought for crumbs, raking in profits. Running a hand along Lee Hyona's cheek, he asked if she thought she'd chosen wisely to stay with him. She grinned and nodded. The smug millionaire already planned to do whatever he pleased with the pretty girl, confident his wealth bought her obedience, until frantic footsteps echoed in the hall. The mob from the garage had arrived, carrying tools to break doors in the dead of night. Blondie overheard they were gunning for him, blaming him in the group chat for price hikes. They began pounding on his door. Blondie might be loaded, but could all that money save him now? He froze as the crowd kept battering the door. Mr. Jiang's frenzied followers had completely snapped. Outside, the blizzard raged on without pause. Inside Han Feng's place, wires and gear were scattered everywhere. He kept tinkering with his Home Alone-style trap, making a huge mess. Han Feng followed all the steps to arm the door, but the meter showed no current, leaving him puzzled. Suddenly, the haphazard bundle of wires sparked and burst. The line must have gone live at that moment. The blast made Han Feng cough as he stumbled back. He doused the flames but still couldn't figure out the problem. If the internet worked, he'd have looked it up easily. Then someone knocked before he could finish the trap. Han Feng peered through the peephole to see who it was. He spotted only a short figure with messy hair. It was the outcast girl again, standing there with her usual blank look, asking for help. Terrible timing, Han Feng was still scrambling with his traps. A memory of being tricked by a witch and ambushed by a madman flashed through his mind. He backed from the door, uneasy about what might be waiting. Han Feng warned her that raiders were smashing doors and looting supplies. Instead of letting her in, he told her to hurry home. He wasn't opening up. She stood alone in the dim hallway, silence heavy around her. Then she pounded the door harder and louder. When he still didn't answer, she slumped at the threshold, shivering. The cold bit at her as the raiders' voices grew nearer on Han Feng's floor. They didn't care how many people lived there, they planned to smash every door. Two rough men scanned the hallway, thrilled to be first on the 18th floor. They quickly split up the rooms to loot, and by chance Han Feng's was closest. One raider jammed a crowbar into the door frame. Pretending to deliver supplies, they called out to check if anyone was inside. Han Feng clamped a hand over the girl's mouth to keep quiet. When no one replied, they started prying the door open with the crowbar. Han Feng whispered to reassure her that their reinforced door could handle the assault. Hearing him, she relaxed slightly. The intruders rattled the handle repeatedly, but couldn't crack it. Frustrated, they marked the apartment and moved on. Luckily, the heavy-duty door with its 5-centimeter iron plates held strong. Even the installer had been impressed. Han Feng felt a surge of pride in his foresight, forgetting he was still covering the girl's mouth for silence. Yet the outcast girl quietly thanked him for letting her in before the raiders spotted her outside. They decided to linger a few more minutes just to be certain. Soon it seemed the raiders had finally cleared out. Han Feng jumped back into his trap project, determined to wire the door so any intruder would get a deadly shock. The girl watched curiously and asked what he was up to. He bragged it was an electric defense system and smugly said she wouldn't get it, even though he barely did. Installing it was a nightmare. Little did he know she was a pro at voltage and anti-theft wiring. Calmly, she coached him to cut the power first and wind the exposed wire neatly around the handle. Next, they ran another wire from the breaker box to the handle, and for the grand finale, flipped the power back on. When Han Feng tested it, the meter flashed a dangerously high voltage. When he asked how she knew so much, she claimed the true eye of the evil king let her see the world's hidden truths. Since she'd helped with the trap, he asked what favor she wanted in return. Without a word of explanation, she dumped her backpack's contents onto the couch, ignoring him. Then she calmly announced that the true eye of the evil king would now live here. Han Feng needed a moment to absorb that. He immediately protested, insisting she go back to her own place. Flustered, he tripped over the loose wires on the floor. His body pitched forward after a brief stumble. He slammed onto the hard floor, scattering tools everywhere. His hands glowed a strange bright purple, pulsing with odd energy. The fall should have hurt. And that's when he noticed where he landed. The coffee table solid seconds ago had turned pliable like clay. Could he have accidentally softened it somehow? He finally connected the purple glow to the table's sudden softness. Even the nearby toolbox and tools warped when touched by the light. He picked up a hammer and its metal head bent inward. Waving it around only made it sag more. The purple light could soften objects. Outcast girl silently watched the bizarre scene. She stayed so quiet he forgot she was there as he tested the new power. Her blank stare never wavered. Then her eyes brightened as she proclaimed him an emissary chosen by the true eye of the evil king, whatever that meant. Han Feng decided to play along, pretending to be that emissary instead of revealing the real power. Her logic was strange enough that he figured he could pull it off. As a fellow emissary, she suggested they cooperate, which meant sharing his apartment. Before he could object, she was already heading to a spare room as if it were hers. He hadn't even said yes, yet she acted like they were setting up the evil king's lair. It wasn't worth a fight, so he let it slide. What mattered now was understanding this mysterious purple light. At first glance, it clearly made things soft. That meant he possessed more than just 2 light powers. There might be many he hadn't uncovered. The trigger had been tripping on the cables and nearly smashing into the soft table. So recreating that moment might reproduce the ability. Focusing on that memory, Han Feng soon summoned the purple glow again. He was getting quicker at calling his powers on demand. He first tested it on the same wires that sparked the discovery. Then he moved to a sharp kitchen knife. Activating the purple light, he watched in awe as the steel blade softened like putty. It grew so malleable it wrapped around his hand like jelly. Excited, he experimented on every household object he could find. Everything softened under the purple glow, though nothing changed except texture. On its own, the ability seemed pretty useless. Then he had a thought, what if he combined the purple with the green light? He quickly got the hang of merging both colors. Grabbing the gooey knife, he infused it with purple and green at once and yelled Bankai, like a Bleach character. To his shock, the blade instantly solidified, sharp and sturdy again. It even shone like a polished mirror. Spying a tissue box, he decided to experiment again. He coated a tissue in the dual lights and tried bending it. It resisted completely. So he could actually increase an object's toughness by mixing the two lights. The strength the combined colors gave was intense. That toughness could have some very practical uses. Meanwhile, the raiders who'd stolen supplies began hoarding them instead of sharing, afraid of running out. They whispered that they wouldn't divide their hard-won haul with women or the elderly, but kept it secret to avoid backlash. As they plotted, one of them noticed something eerie on the wall. To their shock, the 18th floor wall seemed to writhe. When they shone a flashlight, a human face bulged from the concrete. It twisted and grimaced as if trying to break free. These hardened thieves might be fearless when looting, but this was nightmare fuel. As the apparition's arms pushed through like a ghost breaching reality, the lights flickered out. Anyone would think they'd stumbled into a haunting. Terrified, the raiders bolted down to the floor below. Meanwhile, Hanfeng was struggling to breathe while pressing his face through the softened wall. He had to break free of the clay-like surface before he ran out of air. He'd chosen that wall to test his combined purple and green power, but applying it across the entire surface was exhausting. After a long effort, he gathered massive amounts of energy and fused the two lights together. The process drained him, but the wall became stronger than ever. To check his success, he hauled out a sledgehammer. Standing before the fortified wall, he raised the heavy tool. With a focused look, he prepared to strike. He swung hard, the hammer slamming into the surface. He repeated the test again and again, until his arms trembled from the weight. The effort was worth it. The enhanced wall didn't even chip. Down in the basement garage, several raiders returned, reluctantly handing over a few bags of stolen goods. One man scratched his head, apologizing for bringing back so little. He looked jumpy. When someone tapped his shoulder, he nearly jumped out of his skin. The tapper immediately flipped him onto the floor and pinned his arms. It was one of the Jin brothers. Jin demanded to know where the rest of the food was hidden. The man denied everything. But Jin had seen him lug 3 big bags earlier and wasn't buying it. Even with his arms twisted, the thief kept lying. Deciding pain might force honesty, Jin raised a fist for a beating. A calm hand on his shoulder stopped him. To everyone's surprise, it was Mr. Jiang himself. Mr. Zhang gently asked Jin to release the man so they could talk if there was truly an issue. He listened to the accusation of hoarding food and said he'd handle it personally. Jin finally let go and shoved the culprit aside for Mr. Jiang to deal with. The raider looked up to see a hand offered in help. It belonged to the basement's own representative, the ever-smiling Mr. Jiang. That kind smile calmed the crowd, though a hint of menace lurked behind it. After some patient talking, the man finally revealed the hidden stash. Just as suspected, 2 extra bags of food emerged. He apologized, explaining he had 5 mouths to feed and the rations weren't enough. Hearing this, Mr. Zhang handed over his own share for the day to the man. He insisted on following the rule of turning in gathered goods for proper rations, but he also showed compassion for those barely surviving. The generous gesture nearly brought the deceitful raider to tears as he thanked Mr. Zhang from the depths of his heart. The sneaky thief, Lao Wang, vowed that if Mr. Zhang ever needed help in the future, he'd show up without hesitation. Facing the long single-file line of people, Mr. Zhang urged everyone to collect their rations and hurry back home. The Jin brothers, however, wondered how Mr. Zhang convinced the thief to return everything so easily, and why he even gave the man extra rations from his own supply. Mr. Zhang simply said he hadn't done much, just helped the man grasp an important principle. Naturally, the Jin brothers were curious about what that principle was. Mr. Zhang explained that throughout the nation's history, riots and uprisings often erupted from clashes between different social classes over their interests. Yet those riots were defined as collective social actions. If someone wasn't caught red-handed, the courts wouldn't convict them. All Mr. Zhang had done was warn the thief that breaking the rules would make the entire group reject him, turning him into nothing more than a plain criminal. And after the chaos settled, the law's punishment and the vengeance of the victims would come for him. The weight of those consequences made the decision to give up easy. Uncle Lu observed it all quietly from a distance, nothing more than a silent onlooker. He also understood that Mr. Zhang had intentionally skipped mentioning that every riot always has a ringleader steering the crowd. Heroes or villains inevitably surface in troubled times, and he sensed that spark inside this John kid. Meanwhile, our builder was still swinging his sledgehammer around the house, reinforcing every weak spot until it felt nearly unbreakable. The effort drained him, but at least his windows now seemed indestructible. With the entire house reinforced and its durability tested, he finally thought he could relax. That's when someone started knocking on the door again. This was becoming a regular annoyance. He tiptoed across the floor, wondering if those resource-thieving neighbors were back. At the entryway, he peered through the peephole to see who it was. To his shock, it was Lee Hyona, shivering in the cold and crying as she called his name. The scene felt all too familiar as she rambled about how she could never betray the feelings he had for her. She claimed that only in hard times can you truly understand someone's heart, and only a man who truly loved her would support her without conditions. If he just opened the door, she promised to open her heart. Han Feng's mind flashed back to the night of his murder, ambushed in his own room. He remembered how this woman and her partner had made a mockery of him. Tonight, she was repeating the same exact lines she'd used before his death, which meant a man was lurking outside, ready to bash his skull the moment he fell for the act. Han Feng's first thought was to grab his gun and put an end to this vile pair right away. But he stopped halfway. With the power out, the man hidden in the dark had the advantage, and if Han Feng missed his shot, he'd be the one dead. Setting up an electric trap to catch two people at once was out of the question. For now, he forced himself to stay calm, shutting off his generators. He had only one chance, so focus was everything. The real danger wasn't the woman at the door, but the man concealed in the shadows. Han Feng needed to pinpoint his position and strike lethally the moment he stepped outside, a tricky task. Based on memory, the man was likely hiding in the blind spot just behind the door. Estimating the killer's location through the wall, Han Feng gripped the sledgehammer tighter. An idea sparked. It would take some time to set up, but it might be his best shot. Pressing his palm to the wall, violet light gathered in his hand as he willed the plan to succeed. Outside, Li Hyona kept up her damsel act, crying out for Han Feng. The man she'd recruited to rob and kill him was beginning to waver, but she urged him on, insisting that Han Feng had massive stockpiles of supplies delivered just before the disaster. Anyone would be tempted by the chance to snatch enough resources to live comfortably for days, but they picked the wrong superpowered target. Behind the assassin, the wall softened and shifted like clay. The killer heard strange noises, but Li Hyona was too focused on her performance to notice. By the time he realized the sound came from behind, it was too late. A sledgehammer fused with the malleable wall smashed into his jaw with brutal force, shattering it completely. The witch staggered back in shock as her partner flew like a rag doll. She asked what happened, but he could barely move, trembling in pain and cold. At that moment, the once sealed door creaked open. Han Feng stepped out with a fire extinguisher in hand and a sly grin on his face. The haggard witch looked at the supposed loser with sudden fear. Before she could say a word, Han Feng unleashed the extinguisher, dousing her in the white spray as she screamed. Li Hyona, ever the actress, kept her soft tone as she begged him to stop covering her with the cold mist. Some of the spray even got into her mouth, never a good idea. She coughed violently as the freezing agent chilled her to the bone. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the rich blonde thug she'd brought lying on the floor, convulsing and crying for help. Sadly for him, Li Hyona wasn't in any shape to help. Han Feng's hand emerged from the cloud of white as he reached for the witch. She reacted fast, but he still grabbed a fistful of her hair and her scarf. Maybe adrenaline gave her strength, but she tore free, losing a chunk of hair in the process. Slippery as ever, she scrambled to her feet and bolted, screaming for help. Han Feng clicked his tongue at how quickly she escaped. The man he'd hammered wasn't so lucky. Still struggling to rise, he became Han Feng's next target. Fueled by fury, Han Feng kicked him hard in the stomach, ready to stomp the man who'd killed him in a past life. The blonde thug begged for a moment. The coward started name-dropping his father and spouting threats, promising trouble if Han Feng touched him again. Han Feng answered with another crushing punch, mocking the spoiled brat about what he could possibly do next. He didn't care who the punk's dad was. He intended to beat him until he was satisfied. Realizing threats failed, the blonde tried a softer approach, calling Han Feng brother. He insisted they had no real conflict, so the beating wasn't deserved. Memories of his past life raging inside, Han Feng slammed the man's head to the floor again. Straddling his chest, Han Feng unleashed punch after punch while shouting out all his bottled anger. This man had ended his life for no reason when he'd been minding his own business. With bloody gloves and eyes full of malice, Han Feng demanded the punk say something. But Blondie's jaw was too shattered to form words. Han Feng stood and grabbed the modified baseball bat nearby. Holding the weapon that had killed him once, he stared at the helpless culprit. The rich brat coughed blood and asked why he was being treated like this. Han Feng's fury spiked. This killer dared to ask for a reason. He swung the nail-studded steel bat down on the man's face with full force. The crack of bone and splatter of blood echoed through the 18th floor hallway. At last, his revenge was complete. He had killed the one who murdered him. Heart pounding and adrenaline fading, Han Feng stared at the gruesome scene. The reality of his actions hit, and nausea rose in his throat. He barely turned his head in time before vomiting on the floor. Trying to steady himself, he froze when a familiar female voice cleared her throat. Turning, he saw the outcast girl sitting by the door, casually playing with the blood. She must have witnessed everything and offered to help clean up. They tidied the crime scene swiftly. She didn't even flinch at the gore, which made Han Feng uneasy. Something about her felt off, and he didn't want her staying there. Using the excuse that more criminals might soon come for revenge, He urged her to leave before she got caught in any crossfire. But sipping her orange juice, she showed no concern for potential intruders. Han Feng simply wanted her gone for her own safety, yet she stubbornly refused, unmoved by anything he said. He warned that the coming days would be deadly and both of them could die. She calmly set her orange juice on the table as though making a declaration. The outcast girl assured him the evil king's true eye would keep them safe. But for now, that mysterious power was drained and she needed sleep. Han Feng had had enough of this nonsense. He grabbed her arm before she could lock herself in the room. He demanded she quit brushing him off with edgy talk and pay attention to the serious danger ahead. She merely looked at his tight grip, then raised her eyes to his. She told him to open the room's door, perplexed. Han Feng followed her cue and peeked inside. Whatever he saw shocked him to his core and left him speechless. Meanwhile, the basement parking area buzzed with people, some loitering and blocking those still waiting for rations. Even so, the system kept functioning. Supplies were still limited, but things remained mostly calm. Li Hyona, having escaped Han Feng's grasp, now stood in line with everyone else, waiting for her share since she had no one left to cling to. She gave her name and apartment number and received a simple piece of bread. The witch still fumed over the previous night's events. Her wealthy patron hadn't returned after collapsing so mysteriously. The only explanation was that Han Feng had set a trap from the start. Yet that only deepened her curiosity about whatever he was hiding beyond that door. Before all the chaos, she noticed a flicker of light and a gentle warm draft slipping out, hinting that he had some sort of power source. Maybe he wasn't just hoarding supplies, maybe Han Feng had actually prepared for the blizzard from the start. Bitterness flooded her. The sly bastard hadn't breathed a word to her about the looming disaster, savoring the good life while she settled for scraps. She burned to find a way to peek inside his place. Lost in angry daydreams, she bumped into a man waiting in the ration line. He recognized her instantly, flashing a bright beam of light right in Li Hyona's face. With a friendly grin, the man invited her to Block 5's lobby, where a few survivors were keeping warm around a brazier. Not interested, she insisted she'd rather stay warm at home. But the guy wouldn't quit. He bragged about his stash, boasting that he had enough food for two if she came to his place. The creep clearly had a thing for women with her style and was eager to take advantage. Li Hyona might be a pain, but even she felt a chill at his sleazy proposition. When his bait failed, the creep switched tactics, loudly accusing her of stealing rations for other households, an accusation that annoyingly was true. The surrounding survivors began to turn and listen. Hyona shoved him aside, smacking him with the very bread she'd hustled. He stood there, humiliated in front of everyone. The creep raised his flashlight, ready to strike. Before he could hit the witch, Nurse Jin stepped in. She slapped him so hard he flew back against a nearby wall. Watching the scene escalate, the other survivors called for the almighty Mr. Zhang to handle it. Li Hyona was stunned by the nurse's sheer strength. In case she was hurt or unwell, the kind nurse offered her a name card and invited her for a checkup. Not wanting more attention, Hyona thanked her and tried to slip away quickly. But the creep wasn't done. He got up and lunged at Nurse Jin. Pinning her down, he spat out an insult, calling the kindest woman in the building a filthy hoe. Just as he raised a fist to strike, someone yanked him off with brutal force. With a single swift move, everyone's favorite gangster, Brother Lei, took the man down. His lips were cracked, and though he looked starved, Brother Lee couldn't stand men who hit women. Finally, Mr. Zhang arrived to break up the chaos. The creep immediately started pointing at Hyona, tattling about her scamming rations and cozying up to the rich kid to hike prices. Seeing the fool still hadn't learned, Brother Lee stepped toward him again. But before he could land another hit, Mr. Zhang grabbed the man by the collar and lectured him on the committee's role, protecting the weak and ensuring everyone got food. In the end, the creep received only a stern warning. Mr. Zhang then turned to Nurse Jin and Brother Lei, apologizing and inviting them to join the committee. Brother Lee declined outright, saying he'd rather starve than rob others under a committee banner. Nurse Jin politely refused as well. She couldn't support the group's heavy-handed ways but was happy to help the sick. As the two headed out of the parking area, Hyona jumped in and asked Mr. Zhang if she could join. The witch latched onto his arm, trying to use her fading charm to secure someone with power. Unmoved, Mr. Zhang explained they only accepted people with real skills. Brother Lee could fight and Nurse Jin could heal. A woman like Li Hyona brought nothing useful to the table in an apocalypse. Desperate, she claimed she knew a location overflowing with resources. Meanwhile, inside Han Feng's apartment, it sounded like he was playing a guessing game with his new roommate. In Outcast Girl's hands rested what looked like a tiny black hole. She kept pulling out random objects as Han Feng tried to describe what he needed, until she randomly produced a mannequin. To clarify, Outcast Girl explained she possessed a dimensional storage ability. She could open a black hole that swallowed anything nearby, but retrieving items was tricky and her aim was terrible. Curious, Han Feng asked about the black hole's interior and how her power worked. Even she had never explored inside. Since she had no issue reaching in, Han Feng figured he might as well take a look himself. So he stuck his head right into the girl's black hole. Don't call the cops, it's not what it sounds like. With half his body in that strange subspace, he opened his eyes to a vast, boundless dimension. Mountains of supplies and random debris floated in endless chaos. Exactly what you'd expect from the superhuman who cleared out the entire eastern supermarket district overnight. Suddenly, Han Feng's eyes welled with tears as he realized there was no oxygen inside the black hole. He yanked his head out, gasping for air like a drowning man. Just a few seconds in that vacuum had been terrifying enough. He scolded Outcast Girl for not warning him. It felt like all the moisture in his body had been sucked dry. She ignored his rant and kept rummaging. Finally, she found what they were searching for. Han Feng had wanted remote-controlled toys. Boxes of drones and RC cars spilled from the void. He was so excited he forgot his near-death experience entirely. Meanwhile, on the icy 18th floor staircase, a few raiders tried their luck at robbing unsuspecting victims. The floor had gained a reputation for harboring a monster. Glass's raider scoffed at those spooky rumors. Besides, Mr. Zhang had personally sent them to scout this level, and they couldn't disappoint the boss. Some doubted the intel provided by Li Hyona, but work was work. None of them realized Han Feng and his new gadgets were watching. Luckily, the monitoring system was ready just in time to track the intruders. They already had a plan. Han Feng would light the fire, then move to phase 2. He set a 2-minute timer on his watch and slipped out. On the stairs, the raiders froze at a faint, eerie sound ahead. Then came a burst of flashing lights. The source turned out to be remote-controlled cars Han Feng had set up earlier. The raiders relaxed when they saw only toys. What they didn't notice were the explosives strapped to them. When the fuse burned out, small blasts lit up the stairwell, swallowing the raiders, thankfully non-lethal. Just lime charges meant to blind and disorient. While they reeled, a drone buzzed overhead. A second explosive dangled from the drone's tail, sending the raiders scrambling back the way they'd come. They tried to outrun it, but Outcast Girl, piloted like a pro, Han Feng insisted they give these punks a proper scare. But in his eagerness to toy with them, the drone dipped too low and too close, letting one raider take a swipe. A crowbar clipped a propeller, throwing it off balance. Losing their only aerial gadget wasn't an option. Outcast Girl fought to steady it, but the spiraling drone veered out the window. The timer finally hit 0, and the firework attached to the drone burst outside like an Arctic New Year show. The blast wrecked the right propeller completely, and control was gone. She tried an emergency, landing near a window on another floor. Han Feng geared up to retrieve their precious drone, but their camera caught something strange. Between the stairs lay what looked like a body. Zooming in, it became clear the figure resembled Brother Lei. Han Feng wondered what the gangster was doing out there in the freezing stairwell. Maybe he got mugged out there too. Right now, Han Feng sees 2 solid reasons to head out, and warns his roommate not to open the door for anyone while he's gone. He packs a few essentials just in case things go sideways. Outcast Girl hands him a radio so they can stay in touch. As the last step, Han Feng grabs his pistol, loads it, and prays he won't have to actually pull the trigger. Flashlight ready, Han Feng creeps down the staircase with caution. Floors 17, 16, and 15 are clear for now, since the scouting raiders already bylaid. The drone's data shows it's a brutal 49.8 degrees C outside. Without serious protection, a person would freeze solid in minutes, maybe seconds. Brother Li is hanging by a thread out there, and Han Feng needs to move fast if he's going to save his bro. Meanwhile, the raider scouting team reports their run-in on the upper floors. Mr. Zhang listens calmly and thanks them for their effort. Their reward, just 3 layers of heavy clothing and a pack of instant noodles each. With supplies this scarce, those noodles are practically gold, only earned by those who contribute. Looking absolutely wrecked, Li Hyona again asks Mr. Zhang if she can finally join the crew, but he shuts her down cold. They still can't even prove that Han Feng caused the attack, and without Uncle Liu witnessing someone moving goods before the storm, Zhang wouldn't even give her story a glance. For now, they plan to regroup and head to that floor with greater numbers. This next operation will prove whether Li Hyona's intel is solid or garbage, her one shot to prove her worth. Gripping a steel pipe with both hands, she's ready to do whatever it takes to be accepted. Before they move, Mr. Zhang reminds everyone that each person is vital to the collective and must guard their own safety. With the big boss leading, a sizable raiding party climbs the stairwell. Halfway up, they spot Brother Li unconscious and freezing. They grab a canister of hot water, and Mr. Zhang pours some so Brother Li drinks and jolts awake with his tongue burning. When his eyes finally open, he glares with disgust at the raiding party that saved him, clicking his tongue in annoyance. Zhang's lapdog jumps in, demanding he thank the boss for saving his life. Brother Li just laughs bitterly, refusing to bow to these self-styled heroes he knows are really thieves. The lapdog tries to curse and swing, but Mr. Zhang restrains him. Ever smiling, the boss offers yet another invite to join them, and once again Li rejects it hard. The raiders grow irritated at his stubbornness and nerve after being rescued. Brother Li hates being ordered around. Before he can turn to leave, Mr. Zhang grips his shoulders, flashing a wide grin and claiming it's all a misunderstanding, saying they only want to strengthen numbers to help the weak survive. But Li sees through the fake smile. The committee that claims to protect the weak is rationing the elderly to one meal every 3 days, basically a death sentence. And with no relatives nearby, guilt-tripping him won't work. One floor above, Han Feng listens quietly to every word. What he hears confirms Jiang Shuyu's group doesn't care about everyone at all. It explains why they recruit the young while letting the old, sick, and disabled slowly waste away. Conflict is inevitable. Fed up with Li's defiance, the lapdog barks right in his face, a mistake that puts him inside Li's striking range. Without hesitation, the gangster with a heart of gold headbutts him as hard as he can. Pain ripples through Lei, but he stays on his feet unflinching. One cold glare from a man with nothing to lose makes the armed raiders instinctively step back. His crew silently waits for their boss's command. Mr. Zhang weighs his options while his men slowly overcome their fear and inch closer. Trembling and barely upright, Li still dares them to attack. Watching from above, Han Feng sees his bro about to collapse and knows he needs backup. But there are too many raiders down there. Jumping in now would be suicide, yet Li has saved him countless times. Han Feng can't just stand by and watch his friend die in a pointless last stand. Suddenly, an idea clicks in his head. He draws his pistol, takes aim, and calmly observes the standoff with his finger on the trigger. No one has struck yet, but Li is already swaying like he'll drop any second. Fed up, Han Feng fires a warning shot. The bullet zips so close to the lapdog's crotch it nearly clips him, sending everyone into panic. The sharp crack of gunfire shatters their confidence. They can't believe someone here has a gun. Han Feng descends the stairs, weapon raised, ordering everyone to stay put. The command works, the raiders freeze. Brother Li spots the familiar gun and instantly knows his little bro is on scene. While the would-be robbers quake, Mr. Zhang stays eerily composed. Among the crowd, Li Haona's eyes widen at the sight of armed Han Feng. Han Feng carefully hands brother Li his house key, and together they edge backward, never taking their eyes off the raiders. The henchmen glance to their boss for direction. Some consider rushing the pair. That notion dies when Han Feng fires another warning shot. He'd already told them not to move, and their testing his patience isn't wise. He orders them to drop their weapons and kneel. Slowly, they comply, fear plain on their faces. That buys Han Feng and his bro enough time to retreat to safety. After a few silent moments and the sound of the duo's footsteps fading, Mr. Zhang rises first and asks if anyone knows the gunman's identity. Li Haona seizes the moment to reveal it's Han Feng, the very man they were targeting. Zhang's lapdog lashes out at her for not warning them about the armed homeowner. Mr. Zhang cools things down, believing Haona had no reason to lie. He explains what this means. If Han Feng has a firearm, it's safe to assume he's sitting on serious supplies. The prospect of more loot sparks excitement in the greedy crowd. Zhang is now sure the delivery's Uncle Liu spotted before the catastrophe were legit. Still, going after Han Feng won't be simple. Any of them could get shot. Yet Zhang figures Han Feng isn't a killer. Otherwise, he'd have dropped a few bodies already. Besides, no one can stay locked inside forever. So the boss lays out a new plan. They'll retreat for now, gear up, and come back prepared. Room 1804 must fall sooner rather than later. Speaking of room 1804, Han Feng and brother Li finally reach the door. Li's hands tremble so badly it's hard to unlock, while Han Feng keeps watch with his finger on the trigger. The moment the lock clicks open, a wave of warm air greets them, pure bliss after the freezing trek. Inside, brother Li is stunned to find a working radiator, humming generator. Behind a glass door sits a treasure trove of supplies that could make anyone drool. Li turns to his younger bro, curious about how this paradise exists. While he marvels at the cozy setup, Outcast Girl pokes her head out to ask whether Han Feng recovered the drone. He's so focused on saving his bro that he completely forgot about the drone mission. 2 hours and several hearty meals later, brother Li finally hears a chunk of the real story. Han Feng simply tells him he foresaw the disaster and prepped like crazy. He also apologizes for keeping it secret, explaining he feared word of his stash might leak. After finishing his meal, brother Li stands and bows deeply, grateful beyond words. Without his little bro, he'd have starved and frozen. Just eating a hot meal again feels like a miracle. When he lifts his head, tears of gratitude stream down his face. Han Feng insists he's only repaying all the times brother Li helped him. Overwhelmed, Li praises Han Feng for being such a solid guy and true brother. With that, Li shares the latest happenings in the building complex. Things have shifted a lot since the last update, back before the power went out. Since then, that schemer Zhang has been hoarding supplies in the name of collectivism, building a following but also earning fierce enemies. Some couldn't survive on the tiny rations and left, but the big boss didn't seem bothered by the shrinking ranks. Behind the scenes, though, he secretly sends Jin Chenwu, his lapdog, to deal with deserters, claiming it's to protect the collective. Han Feng is shocked. Jin Chenwu and Jin Chenwen used to be such sweet, bright, caring twins. Basically, this so-called committee ballooned in power and size at lightning speed, using every shady scheme imaginable. But Brother Li holds tight to the belief that every evil deed eventually meets its payback. Zhang and his thugs made their fatal blunder the moment they decided to mess with a man named Li Zhenghao. That guy, a former national middleweight boxing champion, bad call on their part. Naturally, those committee punks got demolished, yet that stubborn Zhang creep refused to admit defeat or let his little cult lose face. Acting on his direct command, the raiders kept showing up to challenge Li Zhenghao. And of course, every last one of them got smashed to a bloody mess. Thanks to that fiasco, the boxer started gathering his own loyal crew, including two standouts now earning some street cred. First is Young Yu, a boxing fanatic who spent years in underground rings and is notorious for lightning-fast moves. The other is Jin Zhangze, a hardcore Zhenghao supporter blessed with brute strength and a monster-like build. With those two backing the champ, a brand new neighborhood faction was bound to rise, and they loathed Jiang Shuyu's hypocrisy with a burning passion. Brother Liu added that scumbag Jiang, desperate to settle the score, finally set his sights on Han Feng's supplies. He tried to warn his younger bro but blacked out on the staircase. To Brother Liu, that's actually a good sign, proof that Jiang's empire is rotting from within. While the trio debated their next move, a sudden skittering echoed from outside. Outcast Girl quickly pulled up the live camera feed by the door and spotted the raiders assembling right outside. Han Feng jumped up, ready to rig his electric door handle trap. Outcast Girl stopped him, cautioning that a sharp sulfur smell was seeping in from the hallway. Without warning, the whole room rattled, something had just blown up outside. Turns out Zhang and his raiders were reckless enough to start tossing bombs. Judging by the noise, they were using localized demolition charges, strong but not devastating. Watching the live feed, it finally clicked why they were hauling those heavy riot shields. It also became clear that Li Hyona must have tipped these punks off. Meanwhile, the raiders prepped their next round. Han Feng hurried to power up his electric trap. Seconds later, a scream of agony rang out from the hallway. Looks like the trap worked. One unlucky fool went down, making the rest hesitate. But Zhang barked new orders to keep setting explosives, this time doubling the charges around the doorframe. The raiders lined the walls with charges and detonated them again. The blast cracked the walls but still couldn't break through the entrance. Zhang insisted the issue wasn't the explosives. These doors were simply built like fortresses. Refusing to quit, he tripled the load, vowing to keep upping it until the house came down. He was dead set on leveling that place today. Inside, Han Feng and Brother Liu braced the entrance with everything they had. The third blast rattled their barricade and nearly ruptured their eardrums. After that deafening boom, a strange cracking sound followed. The charges were clearly weakening the structure. If it continued, those cracks would just spread until the walls gave way. Blocking the door was pointless, but Han Feng had another plan. First, they had to clear out all the junk they'd piled up. Outcast girls stepped forward to help. Brother Li doubted the tiny girl could do much, until she lifted her hands and summoned a black hole. He stumbled back, stunned and confused. When she began sucking up the heavy barricade pieces, Brother Li nearly fainted at the sight. What should have taken minutes was done in a blink. Brother Li felt a brand new kind of fear toward the little girl and her terrifying ability. Wasting no time, Han Feng activated his purple light, coating his hands as he dashed to the walls. He spread that purple glow across every surface, softening it so he could reshape each crack, staying laser-focused so it wouldn't harden too soon. Once he confirmed every fissure was covered, he triggered the green light next, and thankfully the plan held. The combo of purple and green energy sealed and reinforced the wall. Brother Li just witnessed his two new housemates pull off the impossible. Still reeling, he heard Outcast Girl casually warn them to duck. Right on cue, the third explosion hit, and the trio crouched with their ears covered. Even after Han Feng finished reinforcing the walls, fresh cracks started crawling across them. This time, the raiders shifted their target and began bombing the floor. If they kept that up, repairs wouldn't matter. Han Feng needed yet another plan, one risky enough to demand absolute trust among all three. Outcast Girl was in without hesitation, and Brother Li proved himself ride or die, no questions asked. They only had to follow Han Feng's instructions to the letter. After a few more relentless blasts, the demolition charges finally blew the entrance wide open. Shields raised, the raiders crept inside, intent on looting every scrap of supply. Mr. Jiang warned them to watch for ambush angles as they flooded Han Feng's house. They scoured the kitchen and living room for anything valuable, but found nothing, just trash and a box of seeds. All those explosives for garbage and seeds. The raiders turned to Li Hyona for answers. She swore she hadn't lied and pointed them toward the bedroom. As soon as they tried the last unopened door, Brother Li burst out, kicking a shield square into the raiders' faces. Han Feng followed close behind, pistol in hand. He leveled it right at Mr. Zhang without a flicker of hesitation. Han Feng squeezed the trigger, but the bullet clanged against the heavy shield. He warned the intruders to leave now or face real consequences. From behind their shields, Mr. Zhang accused him of hoarding supplies and ignoring the collective's needs. Letting residents starve and suffer, he claimed they were here to demand justice for such cruelty. The shameless fool even preached that Han Feng should hand over his stockpile to cleanse his conscience, spewing some nonsense about uniting to survive the apocalypse. Han Feng couldn't stomach the man's self-righteous drivel, nothing but moral blackmail. Yet Zhang's men drank it all in, glaring like starving wolves itching to attack. Instead of panicking, Han Feng decided to twist the story. Putting on a perfectly offended look, he demanded to know what supplies they were rambling about. Li Hyona jumped in, insisting they must have hidden everything. She repeated that she'd seen strange light, and even felt heat the last time she was here. Fed up with her grating voice, Han Feng fired another shot that made her flinch, though the shield saved her from a clean hit. He called her shameless for spreading lies. He added that if she hadn't conned him into trading food and essentials for worthless seeds, he wouldn't be in such dire straits. Gradually, the raiders began turning on Hyona, but Mr. Jiang kept his cool and suggested a simple way to find the truth. All they had to do was search the bedroom to see if the place was really empty. Han Feng acted unfazed but allowed the inspection, fingers still on the trigger. After tearing the room apart, the raiders found nothing but more trash and a little girl. Outcast girl played her role perfectly, calling Han Feng her brother. She clung to him, sobbing that she was hungry and scared. Now the raiders were furious. They'd spent half a day breaking in only to find nothing. Enraged, Mr. Zhang demanded an explanation from the witch. With all that time and firepower wasted, she had better give a convincing answer or face their wrath. Cracking under pressure, she kept insisting she wasn't lying, but no one believed her anymore. Her only excuse was to accuse Han Feng of trickery. As usual, she tried to dump all the blame on him. Finally, Li Hyona snapped and charged out from behind the shields, rushing straight at Han Feng. Han Feng was momentarily blinded when her flashlight flared in his eyes. In that instant, his gun was snatched away. By a reckless twist of fate, the witch seized the pistol, leveled it at Han Feng's chest, and demanded to know where he'd hidden the supplies. The raiders stared at her like she'd completely lost her mind as she threatened to shoot him. Some of them even goaded her to pull the trigger. The young man kept insisting she'd already conned him out of every last resource long ago. Just as she prepared to fire, the raiders unexpectedly intervened, smacking the gun from her hand before anyone got hurt. Mr. Zhang's henchmen restrained the raging witch as she kept shouting that she wasn't lying. Before Han Feng could reclaim his weapon, Mr. Zhang calmly reached down and picked up the gun himself. He slowly raised it, locking eyes with Han Feng. Meanwhile, his men kept tearing into the witch verbally, blaming her for the wild goose chase and nearly beating her with metal pipes. Mr. Zhang stepped in to stop any more pointless violence. With their plan a bust, he shifted to damage control, hypocritically reminding his crew that the committee wasn't about senseless bloodshed and that Han Feng's home wasn't an execution site. Waving the gun for emphasis, he offered the witch a chance to change her ways. He even apologized to Han Feng for the chaos and the day's events. Shockingly, he handed the pistol back and promised a proper explanation and apology later. Han Feng cautiously accepted his weapon. Then the ever-shameless Mr. Zhang invited him to join the committee. He urged Han Feng to think it over and give an answer soon. As he and his men retreated, he told Han Feng to deliver his decision at the supply drop the next day. The trio were finally left alone in the eerily empty, now depressing house. Han Feng lowered his head, worried about brother Liu. Then he exhaled in relief. He lifted his head, feeling a wave of reprieve now that the ordeal was done. With the act complete, they could finally relax in warmth and electricity. But since Han Feng's place was compromised, they relocated to Outcast Girl's surprisingly cozy, spacious apartment right above his. Thanks to her, they were able to pull off the entire performance flawlessly. Before the raiders even broke in, Han Feng had orchestrated everything. First, hiding all valuables and supplies inside Outcast Girl's subspace and scattering trash around to sell the illusion. They even opened windows to drop the room's temperature quickly. The goal was to make it seem like they'd been out of provisions for ages, so the committee would waste explosives on an empty prize. Over a lavish meal, the trio celebrated Jiang Shuyu's failed mission, knowing it would spark fury within his ranks. In that chaos, the greedy raiders would surely start blaming weak links, and since Han Feng had a gun while Li Hyona was unarmed and despised, she'd be the perfect scapegoat. The plan worked beautifully, though not without hiccups. Han Feng even lost his gun for a bit, but he'd already considered that the worst-case scenario. He was fairly certain that if Jiang Shuyu got the gun, he'd keep things peaceful to maintain his righteous image. And if the madman had decided to shoot, it wouldn't matter. The magazine was empty after Han Feng's 2 earlier shots. Letting them seize the weapon only made the ruse more convincing. Brother Liu finally relaxed, thinking they just needed to fake hardship while secretly living in comfort, but Han Feng corrected him. Their real mission now was to take the committee down. Meanwhile, back at the car park, the distribution of poultry supplies continued. Even though rations were shrinking, the people's gratitude to Mr. Jiang remained. While the crowd focused on distribution, two shadowy figures slipped into the background. They moved swiftly into a restricted zone where only select members were allowed. The committee workers guarding the stockpiles were just returning to the car park. Those stealthy figures, Han Feng and Brother Liu, kept low and tried to blend in to avoid notice. To their surprise, Brother Liu's intel was spot on. The first 4 floors were completely cleared out. The 5th and 6th housed logistics staff and their families. Mr. Jiang and his core circle occupied the 9th through 12th floors, while the warehouse was likely on the 7th or 8th. Guards would normally be stationed from the 5th floor upward. The duo needed to stay quiet, avoid using the gun, and rely on metal rods whenever possible. As they climbed higher, they noticed an eerie lack of security. Without even drawing their weapons, they reached the 7th floor without a hitch. Brother Liu began to question whether they were even on the right track. Short staffing aside, the total absence of guards felt suspicious. They split up to search the entire floor for the warehouse. Han Feng had expected some action, but the infiltration was going almost too smoothly. Knowing the committee still had the advantage in numbers, the trio's best bet was to dismantle it from the inside. Han Feng figured the whole operation stayed together only because of the promise of supplies. If they found that stash outcast girl, who fancied herself the evil king, could clean it out. Still, pinpointing the exact hiding spot on such a large floor would take time, and they had to stay alert. Eventually, Han Feng heard Brother Liu's signal and headed over. When he saw what caught his friend's attention, he was stunned. One door had the word warehouse brazenly plastered on it, a trap if there ever was one. Even the key sat waiting in the lock. If Brother Liu had been alone, he might have fallen for it already. Truth is, the blonde goof was a loyal friend, but not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. Thin wires wrapped around the key and handle betrayed the simplest kind of trap. If these raiders could afford to bomb Han Feng's door, who knew what else they had rigged? Han Feng told Brother Liu not to touch a thing. For now, they just needed to map out key locations for their eventual strike. As they quietly debated moving to the upper floors, the door next to them creaked open. 2 guards stepped out right as the duo were plotting their supply raid. Everyone froze, processing what was happening. Han Feng snapped back first and bolted, Brother Liu close behind. They raced for the stairwell, but the guards gave chase fast. Han Feng had to block a metal rod swing to save his friend from a nasty head injury. Brother Liu countered with a brutal kick straight to the guard's groin. That bought them enough time to reach the stairwell and lock the door behind them. Unfortunately, the noise drew more guards from the lower floors. With no choice, they hurried upward, praying to avoid more encounters. When they hit the 8th floor, Brother Liu noticed Han Feng clutching his right arm. It was probably fractured from that earlier block. They needed to find a hiding spot fast. Just as they began searching, Brother Liu froze at something ahead. Before he could warn Han Feng about the figure looming behind, the young man was yanked into a dark room as if he weighed nothing. The door slammed shut the instant Han Feng was pulled inside. Darkness swallowed him whole. When his vision adjusted, a tall hooded man loomed over him, sending a jolt of fear through his chest as Brother Liu pounded on the locked door. The stranger demanded to know what they were doing on those floors. Desperate to cover, Han Feng lied that they were just collecting supplies. But the bluff failed instantly. The man stomped on his injured arm, making Han Feng scream in pain. Under the hood was an older man with gray hair and a scruffy beard. He told Han Feng to quit lying. He'd watched them skip the 5th and 6th floors on purpose, clearly plotting something against the committee. When Han Feng asked if he'd been following them, the old man simply questioned why Han Feng thought there were no guards on the upper levels. In the corner of the room, the supposed warehouse guards lay unconscious in a heap before they could speak further. The sound of more committee troops flooded the hallway outside. That could only mean Brother Liu had been caught. The old man clicked his tongue in irritation. He walked toward the nearest window, turning the icy handle, letting a blast of frigid air rush in. Han Feng asked why he was opening an 8th floor window, pointing out it was roughly a 4-story drop. But the snow outside had piled between the 3rd and 4th floors, enough of a cushion to survive the jump. With raiders swarming, their choices were to leap or be beaten to death. And speaking of raiders, they were already pounding at the locked door. Han Feng began mulling over the old man's warning, while that fearless geezer had already hurled himself down without a shred of hesitation. This happened the instant the door burst open with a loud crack. Deciding to gamble everything, Han Feng chose to follow the old man's daring lead. Terrified but resolute, he leapt from the 8th floor, praying the thick snow below would break the impact. For extra safety, Han Feng aimed to land hands first, so he could channel that violet glow to soften the landing zone. By the time he hit the ground, the old man had already shaken himself free from the snow, perfectly fine and unscathed. Han Feng's own landing was a bit clumsy. Still, he survived, just winded and catching his breath. Up above, the raiders stared out the window, eyes wide like they'd just watched lunatics at work. Wasting no time, the old man sprinted to the nearest window and smashed the brittle glass with his elbow. Even Han Feng had to admit the old man's survival instincts were next-level relentless. The guy was hardcore. Han Feng quickly climbed in after him, barely escaping the furious committee raiders. Mr. Zhang's lackeys didn't dare jump and chase. They were stuck taking the stairs like ordinary folks. Eventually, the old man guided Han Feng into a small room and sparked up a fire for some much-needed warmth. Han Feng confessed he would have been caught if not for this bearded veteran's help. Instead of settling lower, the old man had practically hauled him up to the 5th floor. Their pursuers would naturally assume they'd hidden on the lower levels and were now flooding those floors with traps. Spotting the uneasy expression on Han Feng's face, Beardy casually asked if he was scared, which was fair. After all, they were sharing firelight beside a dead body. When Han Feng wondered why he'd been rescued, the old man corrected him sharply. If given the chance, he'd gladly finish Han Feng off himself. Still, he gave the kid credit for avoiding that obvious trap in the fake warehouse, and now wanted the full scoop on the committee. If Han Feng clammed up or lied, Beardy promised he'd beat the truth out of him. Thinking back to how the old man single-handedly dropped all those guards, Han Feng guessed he'd been prowling the higher floors, maybe to steal supplies or settle a score with the committee. Either way, Han Feng and Brother Liu had clearly thrown a wrench in his plans. Han Feng asked if the old man had a personal grudge against Mr. Zhang and his crew. The old man admitted he did, and hinted he knew a secret Jiang Shuyu was hiding. That made Han Feng perk up, eager to know what kind of secret it was. The old man rose, convinced now that this kid had some tie to Jiang Shuyu, and pressed for more. Beardy demanded Han Feng spill everything he knew about the committee. Unless, of course, he wanted to end up as the next corpse in the room. The choice was entirely his, though the threat of a brutal beating loomed large. Han Feng launched into a rant about his nasty encounters with that cold-eyed creep. In short, Zhang blew up his house, stole his girl, and looted his stash. Han Feng even claimed he'd once aimed a pistol at them for revenge, though a measly handgun was hardly enough. Mixing a little truth with a few fabrications, he slipped in the pistol story, hoping the old man would buy it. Beardy seemed convinced, sighing as he remarked that a junk pistol meant nothing to the committee big shots. The fact that Zhang let Han Feng go without seizing the gun proved the point, and when asked why, the old man offered two theories. One, Zhang was just putting on a righteous act to maintain his image. Two, and far scarier, he had an arsenal of stronger weapons hidden away. Han Feng added that he'd brought his brother along to finish Jiang Shuyu once and for all, hoping the committee would crumble without its head. While the committee started with good intentions, they had helped some people survive. But Jiang Shuyu's cold pragmatism had convinced many that cruelty was the only way to live comfortably. Even if the apocalypse ended, those who'd lost their morals would never fit back into normal society. That was exactly why they had to end the committee's corruption. The old man agreed, yet he worried about the chaos that might follow their victory. In a world where the strong always prey on the weak, killing Jiang Shuyu might plunge the neighborhood into pure lawless carnage for scraps of resources. If that was the risk, maybe they needed a third opinion. Conveniently, someone else had been listening from the other side of the door. The eavesdropper suddenly hurled a water canister at the old man's head and missed. Beardy counterattacked, only to feel his fist stopped by a surprisingly small figure. He noticed the trembling hands that were holding him back. He shifted, ready to slam the intruder's head, but froze when a familiar voice rang out. There stood a pink-haired girl in an adorable coat, none other than the charming Nurse Jin. Spotting Han Feng inside, she recognized him as Mr. Han from the hospital. Once things settled, Nurse Jin treated Han Feng's fractured arm and kept apologizing for overhearing their private talk. She explained she'd only stopped by after picking up Grandpa Li's supplies for a recheck, found the old man dead, and panicked when she heard the door open, hiding instinctively in the next room. Beardy suspected she might have had a hand in the old man's death, seeing her selfless image as a farce. Though he wasn't entirely wrong, Nurse Jin stood by her choices. Call her heartless if they wanted, surviving meant she could save more lives in need. Besides, Jiang Shuyu had given her a pass to roam freely. She also benefited from committee supplies, even if she wasn't officially part of them. But lately Mr. Zhang had been driving out many of the sick and elderly. Grandpa Li was one such victim, which made cruel sense, one less mouth to feed. The committee could cling to power longer that way. And according to Brother Li, a new faction was rising in the area, with local boxers challenging the committee. Jiang Shuyu likely wanted to crush the competition, which explained why he was dumping the old and weak to favor the young and healthy. With those desperate tactics, a full-on conflict seemed inevitable. A brutal war could erupt sooner rather than later. If so, finding Zhang's rumored weapons cache might be their best move. Beardy asked what Han Feng could even do alone if he found the stash. Han Feng insisted he'd figure it out when the time came. He refused to just sit and die. Beardy thought they were doomed either way, so he wasn't about to stop Han Feng from digging his own grave. He warned that Jiang Shuyu and the committee were merely small fish in a massive pond. More bloodshed for survival was inevitable. In this dog-eat-dog world, only the last one standing wins. With that, Beardy swung open a window and slipped out. Guy clearly hates using doors. That left Han Feng and Nurse Jin alone. The strong-willed nurse eagerly asked if she could help. Han Feng politely refused, not wanting to drag another soul into danger. But Nurse Jin wouldn't back down. Having heard everything, she couldn't just watch the neighborhood fall apart and fumed over what Jiang had done to Han Feng. Seeing the fiery determination in her eyes, Han Feng found himself unable to turn her away. With her now on his side, he actually did have something she could help with. Meanwhile, back at the car park, the guards reported their encounter with Han Feng and the old man. And speak of the devil, Han Feng showed himself openly, practically walking into the lion's den. He was thrown into a secluded room, cut off from everyone else. There he was beaten until he coughed and vomited. Mr. Zhang's lackeys tied him up, kicked him repeatedly, and warned him against stealing committee supplies. One of the indoctrinated twins threatened to cripple his other arm if he ever set foot on their turf again. The abuse would have continued if Mr. Zhang hadn't urgently needed all hands to handle a sudden emergency. Once the goons finally left, Han Feng's body began to glow green. He healed his wounds, though the bruises and aches were the price for making it back to the committee's area alive. Han Feng planned to hunt for the armory as soon as he finished healing. Every second was precious. After bathing himself in that green light, he softened the rope with a pulse of purple energy. He even repaired his fractured arm, though the green light drained him so badly he nearly passed out. He really needed to learn how to heal specific spots instead of wasting energy across his whole body. Just as he recovered and freed himself, footsteps approached from outside. The door creaked open and the thugs tossed in a bound Brother Li. Luckily, Han Feng quickly rewrapped the rope around himself. The goons hurried off soon after, giving Han Feng the chance to check on his brother. Brother Li's face was a swollen mess, normally no model but now even worse. Han Feng gave him a sharp slap to wake him, adding insult to injury but getting results. Brother Li only wished the slap had landed on the less swollen side. Now the entire left half of his face was numb. He recounted how he'd been dragged through a separate corridor. Before the guards caught him, he had slipped into the power distribution room and hidden there. While inside, he stumbled upon something strange, an odd gaping hole that descended far deeper than any normal utility shaft. Figuring the guards might eventually check the power room, Brother Li took a gamble, grabbed some dangling wires and climbed down into the unknown. He expected it to lead straight to the first basement parking area, but instead the passage stretched all the way to a second underground level. Strangely, the place was completely deserted. All he could see were rows of tightly sealed boxes, perfectly stacked on the floor. Curiosity got the better of him, so he cracked a few open, only to discover they were stuffed with sausages, each one nearly as thick as his arm. He was about to examine them more closely when a sudden sound behind him froze him in place. The next thing he knew, Han Feng's wake-up slap was bringing him back to reality. At last, the reason for Zhang's arrogance became clear, a massive hidden stockpile in those lower levels. Han Feng asked skeptically if the boxes really contained nothing but sausages. If food was that plentiful, why bother blowing things up and stealing rations? The boxes were unmarked, their contents only shaped like sausages, so Brother Li could only assume that's what they were. Even so, something about it felt off. At least they'd confirmed that Jiang Shuyu had a secret warehouse. Suddenly, they overheard guards talking as they returned, remarking on how odd it was that Mr. Zhang had suddenly ordered Li Zi's disposal when just a day ago they'd tried to recruit him. Hearing there was a kill order nearly made Brother Li's heart stop. When the armed guards entered, the captives were nowhere to be found, prompting a frantic search. Little did the guards know, the duo had already prepared a payback ambush. They sprang their trap, overpowering the guards, knocking them unconscious and tying them up. With Zhang now issuing kill orders and hiding a secret cache, whatever lay beneath was clearly worth checking out. Still, with dozens of boxes down there, Brother Li wondered how they'd even tackle it all once they got back to that second basement. Han Feng assured him it would be no problem once they regrouped with the so-called Evil King. Reconnecting his earpiece, Han Feng radioed the Evil King to ask whether the big sister he'd sent had arrived. Strangely, a young girl's voice asked if it was really safe to let in the woman who had once stolen Han Feng's gun. That was bad news. Instead of Nurse Jin, the visitor at the door turned out to be that unhinged witch Li Hyona. Han Feng quickly warned the Evil King to keep the door locked and steer clear of the lunatic, but the signal cut out mid-message. For the second time that day, the two stealthily navigated the icy lower halls, careful not to be spotted. Despite their caution, loud crashes echoed ahead. Survivors dependent on the committee were scrambling upstairs, injured, elderly, and women climbing in panic, while the able-bodied grabbed weapons and gathered in the basement. Chaos reigned as they fought to protect their secret stores. The only explanation Han Feng could imagine was that war with Li Jinghao's faction had finally erupted. Whatever the cause, the turmoil worked in their favor. All they needed was to mask up and blend into the frantic crowd until they reached the evil king. The stairways were jammed with panicked survivors, making it easy for the pair to merge unnoticed. Unfortunately, staying incognito wasn't going to last. Mr. Zhang's errand boy, who was coordinating the evacuation, suddenly slipped and landed hard. Right then, Li Zhanghao's top fighters intercepted the evacuees, eager for blood. Instinctively, Brother Li pulled his little bro aside to shield him from the carnage about to unfold. Meanwhile, upstairs, the evil king peered through the peephole at Li Hyona. The witch pressed her ear to the door, straining to catch any hint of Han Feng inside, but heard nothing, her every move radiating suspicion. At that moment, Nurse Jin finally arrived with her medical kit. She immediately questioned Hyona about snooping around Han Feng's door. Hyona froze, fumbling for an excuse, and lamely claimed she was searching for food. Naturally, Nurse Jin wasn't buying that flimsy story. And Hyona wasn't alone. Behind her stood a ragged crew of weapon-wielding scavengers. Hyona and her gang confronted Nurse Jin, who calmly stated she'd been summoned to treat someone inside. But the sharp-eyed witch wasn't fooled. She'd already seen the nurse talking with Han Feng earlier. Turning to her desperate followers, Hyona whispered poisonous words to incite them. One by one, the thugs advanced as Nurse Jin backed up, warning she'd report them to Jiang Shuyu. Hyona clearly intended to use the nurse as bait to draw Han Feng out. The raiders hesitated, reluctant to harm the building's only medic. Nurse Jin, fed up, warned them she wouldn't stay polite forever. When they ignored her and grabbed her arms, the petite nurse effortlessly lifted one thug, smashing him into another like they were weightless. Hyona and her ragtag crew instinctively recoiled in shock. Taking a steadying breath, Nurse Jin warned them again that interfering with her duties carried consequences. The witch snapped and drew a hidden knife. She slashed at the nurse without a shred of concern for anyone's safety. If not for the nurse's thick coat, the blade would have cut deep. Hyona barked at her followers to stay alert and beware the nurse's freakish strength. During the commotion, the apartment door creaked open. Weapons quivered in the raiders' hands as confusion spread. The trembling intensified into an irresistible pull. Standing in the doorway was the self-proclaimed Demon King, power fully unleashed. For flair, she even flashed a few pointless ninja-style hand signs. Knives, bats, pipes, every weapon was yanked from their grip by her domain. The suction was so strong even Hyona's ragged clothes began to tug free. The raiders tried to flee, but the force was overwhelming, as if a ghost toyed with them. Back on the lower floors, the faction battle raged harder, fists flying and skulls cracking. Amid this chaos, Han Feng and Brother Li were sprinting from a towering brute. Han Feng had accidentally punched the wrong man, triggering a full-on cartoon-style chase. Who wouldn't rage after a single punch left their face apple red and swollen. Desperate, Han Feng fused his green and purple energies into a reinforced glove, gaining a serious power boost. To make matters worse, Zhang's henchmen recognized them in the melee. If caught again, they'd never escape a second time. Han Feng quickly hatched a plan, breaking away from Brother Li. While the thug carried off their small roommate, Han Feng would be the decoy. Risky solo move, but he trusted his odds. He darted around the basement lot, shouting and drawing every gaze his way. Vaulting onto a car, he bellowed at full volume to command attention. Han Feng even flipped everyone off and falsely claimed he'd jacked up supply prices just to starve the peasants. The room went dead silent. Raiders from every faction clenched their jaws in shared fury, forgetting all rivalries. United by one goal, kill Han Feng, they charged. The first phase of his plan was a flawless success. He vaguely remembered the basement entrance sealed by a metal gate, snow piled high against it, ready to burst. He sprinted for the gate, unaware that one of the notorious twins was hot on his tail. A brutal hit sent him sprawling right to his intended destination. With his back to the metal gate, the raging mob cornered him. He placed his palm on the icy steel, focusing his power. Channeling immense concentration, he bathed the gate in shimmering purple light. The mob froze in fear, but when the glow faded, their anger reignited. As they surged forward, the gate softened and warped like putty. No longer strong enough to hold back the massive weight of snow, it unleashed a roaring indoor avalanche. The mob instantly forgot about Han Feng. Survival became the only priority as the avalanche slammed through, sweeping away even the parked cars and burying fighters beneath a mountain of ice. Only those quick or lucky enough reached the exits in time to escape the frozen flood. When the snow finally settled, the basement was a ruined, frozen wasteland. Han Feng had already secured a hidden nook for cover. After confirming the coast was clear, he clawed his way out of the drift. To his surprise, morphing that massive gate into jelly hadn't drained him at all. Maybe his control over his powers was improving. While he pondered this, the same old man who'd saved him earlier appeared. For reasons he couldn't place, Han Feng felt like this strange elder had been shadowing him the whole time. As footsteps of returning survivors echoed closer, the old man yanked Han Feng away. They slipped into a secluded corner of the first basement. Catching his breath, Han Feng demanded to know who this mysterious elder really was and why he kept interfering. Seeing no reason to hide anymore, the man introduced himself as Li Zhenghao, leader of the uprising against Jiang. He extended a hand to the younger fighter, but Han Feng remained wary of his motives. Zhenghao explained he sought an alliance. Though he'd refused to work with Han Feng before, circumstances had changed, yet Han Feng stayed justifiably skeptical. He has zero interest in getting tricked into some nightmare deal. From Yonghao's perspective, it's simply two sides working toward one shared objective. After mulling it over, he realizes partnering with a powerhouse like Li Jinghao would massively boost their odds of taking down Mr. Zhang. Still, he doesn't entirely trust the grizzled old-timer. Even so, Han Feng agrees to a short-term partnership. The pair seal the arrangement with a firm handshake. Meanwhile, several floors down, Mr. Zhang is busy giving every hidden vehicle in the second basement parking level a final inspection. Only now does he catch wind of the avalanche that ripped through the upper floor. The building's temperature plummets while his scattered crew scrambles. Worse, the captives have vanished without a trace. Yet Mr. Zhang stays composed, convinced these side disruptions won't derail his bigger plan. Not far away, Li Zhenghao and Han Feng creep through the shadows. Zhenghao had spotted this area brimming with military jeeps earlier and overheard chatter about relocating certain residents. Where anyone could possibly relocate in this frozen wasteland remains a mystery. Determined to find answers, Zhenghao dives in head first, relying solely on his trusty fists. Completely oblivious, Mr. Zhang keeps barking orders to his men. Their organized hustle is shattered by the sharp crack of nearby gunfire. Before they can regroup or figure out what's happening, an intruder has already slipped past their defenses. Zhenghao unleashes his strength and skill, dropping Mr. Zhang's inner circle one opponent at a time. Startled and shaking, Zhang's guards fire wildly in panic. Gunshots and the sting of gunpowder don't rattle Zhenghao in the slightest. His only trusted weapons are the battle-scarred fists he's honed for years. Naturally, Zhang's elite guards stay close to their boss, never expecting multiple attackers, a critical miscalculation. Han Feng uses the gap to slip through their shaky defense. In a flash, he's pointing a gun at the back of the boss's head. Rather than panic, Mr. Zhang simply smiles and thanks Han Feng for finally arriving. He admits he always knew this showdown was inevitable, it was just a matter of timing. One twin turns to witness his boss cornered, and Zhang calmly orders his men to stand down. He recognizes Han Feng as the guy who stockpiled ridiculous amounts of supplies before everything collapsed, assuming Han had special connections. But that assumption is clearly wrong. When Han Feng checks the pistol's magazine, he discovers a hidden recording device, planted earlier by Mr. Zhang during the apartment incident. Otherwise, Zhang would never have handed a flawless weapon to an enemy. He'd known Han Feng's entire plan all along. If Zhang had wanted the young man dead, it would have happened already. Truth is, Mr. Zhang still hopes Han Feng will join his faction, allowing them to keep funneling people to a specific group for survival. But Han Feng is done being anyone's pawn and flatly declines. Right then, a squad of fully geared soldiers storms in. Their disciplined, razor-sharp movements scream special forces. 3 gunmen train their weapons on Han Feng, ready to turn him into Swiss cheese. He might have bolted blindly, praying to dodge every bullet, if Yonghao hadn't grabbed him and yanked him into cover. Heart-pounding, Han Feng glances at the old man, desperate for an exit strategy, but Zhenghao just tells him to relax. To him, facing 3 special ops soldiers is nothing to sweat over. Li Jinghao volunteers to act as bait, while Han Feng must seize the perfect opening. The idea sounds absurd. Who plays decoy against rifles set to full auto? To prove it's possible, Yonghao breaks from cover, keeps low, and charges straight in. He moves so fast it seems like bullets can't even graze him. Once he closes the distance, the weapons in his fists prove just as deadly. His close-quarters skill and lightning reflexes feel almost inhuman as the old fighter weaves through the hail of bullets. Meanwhile, Mr. Zhang prepares to board a vehicle for his next delivery. Han Feng has no intention of letting him slip away unchallenged. Channeling a violet glow, he floods the ground with energy, turning the pavement to sludge. As the concrete softens, the tires sink deep into the muck. That alone stops Zhang's ride from leaving the garage. Staring at the side mirror, Zhang can hardly believe the ground is swallowing his tire. Han Feng smirks, ready to sabotage the next wheel from a safe distance. When a frag grenade sails his way, a hooded figure catches him mid-mischief, ignores every firearm and hurls the grenade. As Han Feng's life flashes before him, the hooded stranger grins and offers a casual salute. The grenade clanks against the jeep. Detonation is seconds away. Han Feng takes the blast point blank. No ordinary person could survive that. The explosion tears his body apart. The grenade does its deadly work. Next thing he knows, he's opening his eyes to a strange tickling sensation. The dreamlike goats from his past visions return, swarming over him and licking every inch. Eyes shut, he soaks in the playful tickles until a massive tongue joins the party. Naturally, that oversized tongue belongs to a colossal goat. The creature's giant, slimy tongue coils around his bare body as green sparks flicker. Those tiny emerald flashes grow brighter until his form melts and reforms within the glowing light. Back in reality, his body knits itself together at impossible speed, as the green radiance selects and repairs every injury in an instant. Han Feng dies and resurrects as his power activates automatically, body whole again, though his mind seems distant. Meanwhile, the twin in the driver's seat frees the tire from the softened concrete and preps to bolt. But before he can hit the gas, the Jeep's entire side disintegrates into nothingness under a sudden red flash. The eerie crimson light pulses, devouring everything it touches. With a single swipe of his hand, the unconscious Han Feng wipes out half an armored Jeep. After reducing the vehicle to rubble, one twin raises a gun at him. Han Feng snatches the weapon with a glowing grip. The pistol shatters into glittering fragments. The same destructive force begins unraveling Jin Chen-Wu's clothes thread by thread. Mr. Zhang's composure evaporates along with the Jeep's roof as he scrambles for safety. Exposed to the icy air worsened by the avalanche above, the remaining twin quakes in agony. The cold races through him while the red light eats away at his skin. Within seconds, the hapless underling freezes to death. His surviving brother witnesses it all, fury for revenge igniting inside him. Jin then charges the rampaging Han Feng, clutching a metal pipe. He's desperate to smash Han Feng's skull, but it's a hopeless effort. The moment the pipe contacts the red glow, it disintegrates into dust. Mr. Zhang urgently radios for backup. This chaos is beyond anything he anticipated. Han Feng, still unconscious, ignores the surviving twin and fixates on a new target. Purple, jelly-like energy gathers in both his hands as he strides toward another armored Jeep. The driver and passenger freeze helpless as the gooey light devours their vehicle. The Jeep's exterior begins to sag and drip as if made of molten wax. The whole machine liquefies. The terrified occupants scream and claw for escape, but it's far too late. The warped metal solidifies again, trapping them inside as grotesque statues. Hoping to end the carnage, someone opens fire on Han Feng. A bullet skims his cheek, instantly healed by a surge of green light. The rookie guards quake as their ammo runs dry, horrified by what they've witnessed. All that's left for them is to turn tail and flee. They sprint away, trying to cover their retreat. The special ops team shifted their primary focus to Han Feng, though their orders were to protect Mr. Zhang's squad first. Watching his playmates suddenly change targets irritated Li Zhenghao. One special ops fighter peeled off to square up with him in close combat. All the while, Zhenghao kept trying to figure out what exactly was going on with Zheng Ziyu. As bullets zipped after him, Han Feng used his purple glow to scale the walls and gain height. He countered their deadly assault by transforming the floor into a quivering, gelatinous trap. Balance shattered, their aim turned useless, giving him the edge he needed. He surged forward and wiped out their automatic rifles in a single burst of crimson light. Just to spice things up, the mingling green and purple lights fused, allowing him to reshape the leftover gunmetal into a vicious melee weapon. It formed into a warped, savage blade fit for someone losing control of his own body. With one clean swing, he ended the fight, but the strain of pushing his powers to the limit finally caught up with him. The enraged twin seized the moment, leaping from the shadows for a surprise strike. Han Feng collapsed onto the icy, pitch-dark floor. Seeing the once terrifying monster helpless, Chen Wen thought he had an easy kill, but luck wasn't on his side. Li Zhenghao remained on guard, ready to protect his unconscious partner. In a straight one-on-one, a lone special ops thug could never withstand the champion's fist. After hauling Han Feng's limp body to safety, he concluded the young man is pure chaos when he snaps. Then a faint sound echoed from outside. He dashed off to hide instantly. Mr. Zhang had returned to the second basement parking level, flanked by a fresh battalion armed with riot shields and blunt weapons. He led them from the center, gripping his gun like a lifeline. A sweep of the perimeter revealed 2 dead special ops soldiers. There should have been 3, but only 2 bodies turned up. Jin Chen-Wu froze solid, and his brother plus a few others were the sole survivors, with the soldiers gone. They'd lost their guide to the other base camp. Mr. Zhang admitted that today's operation was a total bust, and that they'd need to regroup and rethink their strategy. Han Feng jolted awake, screaming about a grenade. That seemed to be his final memory. Why was he alive? Where was he now? Those questions spun through his head. Luckily, a familiar face, Li Zhenghao, the one who saved him, was close by. When Han Feng asked for details, Zhenghao couldn't explain the knight's insanity without sounding deranged. Still, he had a clearer sense of Jiang Shuyu's overall plan. For specifics, though, he needed a captive willing to spill more, through blood and torture if required. From earlier confessions, the soldiers claimed a so-called base had sent them to trade with Jiang Shuyu, offering food and weapons in exchange for residence. When pressed for the reason, the soldiers stammered that they supposedly needed manpower for construction. Anyone with half a brain knew that was nonsense. In these conditions, nobody wants extra mouths to feed. Still, the soldiers stuck to their story of rebuilding civilization and saving as many people as possible. To cut off further lies, Li Zhenghao snapped one soldier's finger, ratcheting up the pain. That forced the confession that the base would just send more people after this failed mission. Asked if any superhumans were involved, the soldier avoided eye contact and pretended ignorance. That silent dodge practically confirmed the base had mutated individuals, making them a dangerous enemy. Han Feng had only just regained consciousness. He now witnessed Li Zhenghao's icy brutality firsthand, as no more information could be extracted. Yonghao executed the soldier in gruesome fashion, convinced the mysterious base was just another shady faction. Their options were clear: eliminate that group or leave and find a safer haven. For now, Han Feng wanted to regroup with his team and talk it over. On their way back up to the apartment, the young man pondered their choices. Given the intel, scouting for a new foothold might be the safest bet. Before heading upstairs, he stopped at the second basement to inspect the armored jeeps and heavy machinery. He crept quietly until he heard soft footsteps approaching. Trying to ambush the newcomer, he quickly realized he'd walked into a clever trap. A familiar silhouette flanked him, a fist swinging toward his head. Han Feng raised an arm, green and purple light flaring just in time to block. The move flowed out of him without conscious thought. To his surprise, there was no pain. Apparently, that earlier incident unlocked some slick new combos he could now access. As he prepared to counter, a flashlight revealed the attacker was Nurse Jin, nearly sparking an ally brawl. Once the tension settled, Han Feng filled his crew in on everything and laid out his plan to find a way out of the building. Brother Liu raged at Jiang's scheme of trading people for supplies, while the naive nurse argued that sending folks to a supposedly safer base didn't sound so bad. But realistically, if that promised utopia were real, Jiang Shuyu would have gone there already, no armed escorts required. Bottom line, they still lacked critical intel. They didn't even know if this so-called base truly existed, and a new wave of attackers could arrive anytime. For now, they needed to secure a getaway vehicle. Luckily, the lot was packed with heavy-duty rides to choose from. Unfortunately, most of the good ones had no keys. Brother Liu rummaged through the remaining armored jeeps and uncovered a crate of weapons. Perfect loot for the little demon king to stash for later. The crate came straight from the melted jeep. It was Han Feng's first time seeing the aftermath of his unconscious rampage. Meanwhile, the women's attention was drawn elsewhere. In a shadowed corner of the second basement, a massive curtain hid something mysterious. Nurse Jin swore she heard noises behind it. The little demon king grabbed her brightest flashlight from storage. She aimed the beam forward while the others yanked the curtain down together. As the cover dropped, everyone froze in awe and shock. Beneath a mound of icy snow lay a massive tunnel carved toward an unknown destination. Whoever dug it left no clues. The soldier's confession now felt like only the tip of a far larger iceberg. The neighborhood was anything but safe. Brother Liu scanned the area, spotting the neighborhood's frozen drainage pipes, before curiosity pulled them further. Han Feng called a halt and led everyone away from the tunnel, insisting they needed better prep before exploring. They gathered survival gear, food rations, and even a few explosives just in case. With those weapons and provisions, they'd be set for a decent stretch. Han Feng stressed that this first expedition was strictly for reconnaissance. If trouble hit, they'd retreat immediately. Of course, none of this prep would be possible without the little demon king's handy storage dimension. Han Feng and Brother Liu set out while the women stayed behind. He reinforced their room's walls and doors so intruders couldn't breach it. The girls saw them off as Han Feng gave a confident nod. The little demon king, naturally, proclaimed that her true eyes would bless her brave adventurers. With current knowledge, Jiang Shuyu wasn't the only threat. Something worse could emerge from that tunnel. The brothers officially entered the passage, stepping forward with resolve. They'd expected warmth underground, but were sorely mistaken. Everything was frozen solid. Whoever dug through this was a miracle worker. 15 minutes in, they were already navigating tricky terrain. After 30 minutes more, the tunnel split into several branching routes. They chose one at random, climbing and descending for another hour. Whenever they spotted a manhole, Brother Liu tried prying it open, but every cover was locked tight under heavy snow. The two had been wandering for so long that they completely lost track of their starting point, unsure which direction was correct. Thankfully, another cluster of drainage pipes appeared, along with faint sounds drifting in from a nearby residential block. They kept on the trail of those pipes until brick-and-mortar buildings finally came into view. It felt like a blessing straight from the skies. Not long after, they stumbled upon a map of the underground sewers. Despite half a day of exhausting wandering, they they realized they hadn't made it far, still hovering right next to the very neighborhood they had set out from. Smothering Brother Li's grumbles, Han Feng hushed him and whispered to shut off their flashlights. He had picked up the sound of vehicles roaring past nearby. A whole caravan of military transport trucks surged by. They're heading directly toward Han City's residential zone. It was almost certain those were linked to the Special Operations Unit. They must have been using these vehicles in the sewers to shuttle people back and forth for what they claimed was building a utopian base. Brother Li suddenly came up with a genius plan. Why not shadow the trucks and trace their route? He even boasted he knew a hidden entrance into Han City. 1 year back, an elderly woman from Han City had slipped into the sewers, and he had swooped in like a savior. He still bragged about remembering the precise spot, claiming his memory was flawless, good enough to earn him straight A's in high school. When they reached the exact place Brother Li had been bragging about, the manhole cover they needed was frozen solid in place. Maybe his landmark was a little off, but they decided to test the other manhole just ahead. Brother Li clambered up and attempted to force the cover open. He tried 3 times in a row, only to fail and humiliate himself each attempt. On their 4th and farthest attempt, Brother Li nearly burst into tears of joy when the lid finally budged. With relief, they crawled up into Han City's underground parking garage. Seriously, parking lots seemed to be a recurring theme here. Han Feng pressed Brother Li to cut the bragging about his brilliant find and lower his voice. This wasn't their turf anymore. Keeping low, the two crept forward slowly, ducking behind parked vehicles for cover. As they moved, they encountered frozen corpses along the way, and grim traces of past battles left scarring the place. Toward the back wall, several men were smashing away at the concrete with heavy sledgehammers. Watching over them were 2 special ops soldiers, clearly irritated by being stuck babysitting civilians in a dingy neighborhood with awful food. The assault unit didn't get to choose their assignments. It was evident Han City had already fallen completely under military control. Suddenly, the ground began trembling violently. The soldiers barked at the workers to flee. The real digging crew was about to punch through from the opposite side. Cracks splintered across the very wall the laborers had been hammering. Before they could escape, a massive explosion ripped through, flinging them away along with boulders of shattered debris. From the gaping breach emerged a hulking infant-like creature, bald head gleaming and eyes flashing unnervingly. It was enormous, its proportions so off it barely resembled a human being. It had to be the one who secretly tunneled into their neighborhood. One thing was certain, Han City had turned into a death trap. If the 2 of them were discovered now, they wouldn't stand a chance. After finishing the new tunnel, the monstrous baby demanded food, and the soldier in charge placated it by promising snacks once the passage was cleared. The creature clearly despised that answer, veins bulging across its thick neck. With a thunderous slam, it drove its fist into the ground and shattered the flooring. The destruction rippled all the way to where Han Feng and Brother Li were hiding. That was their glaring signal to get out of this cursed place immediately. They crept away carefully, desperate to avoid drawing any notice. Brother Li had been doing well until the dust from the quake clogged his throat. He couldn't stifle it and let out a loud sneeze. Han Feng nearly froze in horror, realizing his companion had just blown their cover. Soldiers immediately spotted the 2 crawling toward a manhole and ordered their men to pursue. Now that their hiding was ruined, all they could do was bolt with everything they had, with no time for regrets. The giant baby moved with startling speed. Though the duo had a slight head start, the monster closed in fast. Once in range, the creature pounded the ground, causing the entire sewer system to collapse around them. The once stable tunnel now fractured into jagged terrain. With escape nearly impossible, Han Feng urged Brother Li to keep running while he bought time. It was the right moment to test his abilities against another superhuman. He spread his purple glow, coating the broken ground beneath them. As the massive baby stomped forward, its boots sank into the gelatinous floor. The monster struggled to pull itself free, but its own enormous weight dragged it down faster, and realization struck: it wasn't the only superhuman here. Han Feng was worth capturing alive. Too late for that, Han Feng added green energy, hardening the ground he had just softened. Restoring the soil's solid state was swift and effortless. The giant infant raged furiously. It no longer wanted prisoners, only to kill the one trapping it with such unnatural powers. Han Feng's face dripped with sweat. Even with his dual powers, the creature was forcing its way out through raw strength and fury. Brother Li, who had gained some distance, noticed his younger comrade in grave danger. Scattered metal pipes caught his eye, sparking an idea. With steady, relentless effort, Han Feng was draining the monster's strength bit by bit. Just a little longer and he could have it locked down completely. Victory by attrition might have been his, if not for Brother Li's overprotective streak toward his gifted partner. Abandoning his escape, the loudmouthed gangster snatched a pipe and charged in to help. With the monster rooted in place, he smashed the pipe straight at its bald head. Sadly, even his strongest swing did no real harm. All it did was enrage the brute further. This was the second time Brother Li's meddling had wrecked Han Feng's chances. The weakening giant suddenly found its second wind. Driven by fury to crush these two pests, Brother Li instantly turned tail while Han Feng was forced to let go of his trap. Just like that, the pair were back to square one. Li's intentions weren't bad, he couldn't abandon his comrade, but it only backfired. After more minutes of relentless fleeing, they somehow lost the oversized monster, the path behind them sealed off by fallen rubble. For the moment they were safe from pursuit, but fresh troubles lay ahead. The first was figuring out where exactly they had ended up. Li swore the sewer map they'd seen earlier was seared into his genius brain and promised to lead them to safety. With bravado, he chose a direction and strutted onward. Han Feng remained thoroughly unconvinced. 10 minutes later, Li declared he recognized the layout branching left. 20 minutes after, he was still chasing random pipelines. By 40 minutes, even he began doubting his navigation skills. Fortunately, Han Feng felt a faint breeze wafting in from nearby. Taking over, he followed the airflow instead. At last, they reached a path sloping upward. A literal light shone at the tunnel's end. Brother Li immediately jumped ahead, pretending he was the one who found the exit. They climbed a slick wall of ice, carefully steadying themselves against the slippery grooves. Finally, they reached the very edge and laid eyes upon the outside world above. It was bleak and dark, snow still falling though lighter than before. Their familiar world was gone, everything locked in frozen ruin. Brother Li clambered out first and confirmed the surface, once covered by water, had solidified into ice. Han Feng surveyed their surroundings, spotting a silhouette resembling the Dingfeng building. That skyscraper was supposed to be the tallest structure within 5 kilometers to the north, which meant all their desperate running had only dragged them in the wrong direction. To put it in perspective, Xingfu District lay in Hunchuan City's southern third ring. They now stood in the northern fourth ring. With the tunnels blocked, their only chance was to march across land to get back. To do so, they would need to pass through Jingxian District first. Given the state of the world, getting home in a single day was impossible. Still, Li puffed his chest and boasted about his many connections in Jingxian. Maybe they'd score a hot meal and safe shelter. He strutted proudly through the snow-crusted streets, until his foot slipped. Luckily, the snow cushioned his fall, though it was a harsh reminder that slowing down was necessary with the roads this slick. Night pressed on, colder and darker. So the pair pushed forward, covering as much distance as possible while searching for a spot to rest. They were roughly 3 kilometers away from Jingxian District, yet the storm worsened. If they endured for another hour in the bitter cold, they might finally step into familiar ground. A few more minutes made it obvious: move faster or freeze to death. To make things worse, they stumbled across 2 men frozen stiff in the middle of the road. Their backpacks showed they had prepared for the journey, but the cold had claimed them anyway. Not a trace of food remained in their bags. Maybe hunger had driven them out for supplies. Either way, this was just the grim reality now. With the storm howling stronger, it might be wiser to pause and recover, then march again tomorrow. No one wanted to end up like those frozen corpses. Against the storm, the two finally stepped into Jingxian District. Just as the blizzard hit its peak, curiously, several villas in the area stood untouched by the snow. As they approached one potential shelter, dark figures emerged through the blinding flurries. Brother Li eagerly offered to approach first and speak with them. Before Han Feng could stop him, warning him of the danger of strangers, Brother Li had already gone ahead. Within moments, 2 men seized him. A gun pressed to his temple, Brother Li became a hostage while Han Feng was stripped of his belongings. Han Feng tried to discreetly reach for his own firearm at his waist, but the robbers weren't bluffing. They fired a warning shot, shouting at him not to pull any stunts. The 2 captors argued with each other about whether to keep their prisoners alive. Hauling dead weight uphill wasn't appealing. Han Feng had no choice but to give up his gun. The muzzle tapped against his forehead. He calculated his ability might let him survive one headshot, but choosing that path would certainly doom Brother Li. The robbers congratulated themselves on capturing armed men. Han Feng tried to play meek, pointing out they had already surrendered everything. Shouldn't that be enough to let them go? But their captors clearly had other plans. He suspected they were being dragged toward a den of cannibals, stored away as backup rations. Oddly enough, that thought wasn't entirely bad. It gave them a possible opening. At their destination, one robber used a fob to open a villa gate. That meant the place still had power. With the inner city long since dark, a generator must be running here. Even under the snow's weight, the villas radiated high-class craftsmanship. To Han Feng's surprise, defensive barricades had been built around the property. A wicked idea crossed his mind. If they disposed of these fools, he and the little demon king could claim the place as a fortress. His sly grin didn't go unnoticed. He got a sharp smack on the back of the head for it. The robbers then ordered them to dig along the defensive wall. If they obeyed, they'd be freed and even get their gear back, as long as they behaved and stopped plotting tricks. The bulkier one, Kyoji, was assigned to oversee them for the first shift. The big brute was already irritated by how bossy his smaller partner acted. He barked at the captives to start digging immediately, when they asked to at least have their cuffs removed. Kyoji snarled and forced them to dig while chained. So Han Feng and brother Li reluctantly complied. A superhuman and a gangster, reduced to mere gravediggers. And who could say whether these scum would actually free them afterward? Han Feng's eyes drifted to a massive mound of snow beside a truck. Closer inspection revealed frozen limbs jutting out, legs, arms, and worse. That discovery spelled nothing but doom. Han Feng subtly pointed the grisly sight out to brother Li. The hardened gangster nearly fainted once his brain caught up to the reality. He was staring at a pile of corpses. Chances were their captors had stacked that gruesome heap themselves. Either way, waiting quietly was suicide. Han Feng quickly devised a plan and outlined it for brother Li to follow. They kicked it off by loudly shouting at each other. They staged a fight over shoveling techniques, making their work drag on painfully. Kyoji noticed, raised his weapon, and threatened to shoot unless they got back in line. But the two kept up the squabble, selling their act. Finally, Kyoji stopped trying to intervene, though he warned them the hole had to be dug before sundown. The moment he turned his back in annoyance, their fight ended instantly. Kyoji strolled back to his post, oblivious that the flat of a shovel was swinging toward his skull. The brute collapsed and the two reclaimed a firearm. Inside the villa, the smaller robber lounged, nose buried in a filthy magazine. He was practically drooling, convinced no one would disturb his little indulgence. Just as he got bolder, a sudden flash of light blinded him. He looked up straight into a gun barrel. The captives dangled their handcuffs mockingly, ridiculing him for being such a degenerate. Within hours, the entire situation had flipped upside down. The hunters had become the prey. Their story, they were mere debt collectors squatting in the villa before the world fell apart. They swore by every god they knew that the corpse pile wasn't their doing. Collecting debts was one thing, but massacres weren't their style. Han Feng lowered his weapon, he believed them. After all, the two weren't the worst kind, and they were free to leave now. Brother Li didn't trust them in the slightest. To him, letting threats roam free was foolish. Han Feng agreed to release them, but with a small catch. Kyoji and his sleazy partner were tossed out into the frozen district with nothing but their underwear. It was only a matter of time before the cold claimed them. With that business handled, it was time to focus on the trek back. The day had begun with scouting tunnels. But thanks to blunders, they had strayed too far from both the mission and their base. Han Feng could only pray that their allies back home remained unharmed. Speaking of those allies, Li Zhenghao was holed up with Nurse Jin and the little demon king inside a reinforced room, waiting anxiously for the duo's return. The old man reminded them that instead of worrying, they should focus on their own survival. A few hours after the scouts had departed, an army emerged from the tunnel. Among them, a towering childlike giant who commanded the earth itself. Zhang Shuyu greeted the contingent. With such power swelling his side, the whole district now bowed to Mr. Zhang's authority, which automatically marked Zhang Hao's group as enemy number one. At that very moment, Zhang Ziyu was likely tearing through buildings, hunting him. The old man scoffed at the residents' foolishness. That army hadn't arrived as heroes. By the time the truth dawned, their lives would already be forfeit. For once, the little demon king spoke plainly. She believed the people were obeying simply to increase their odds of survival in this fractured world. Humans were just that way. After her somber wisdom, she drifted off to sleep. Nurse Jin gently laid a blanket over her. Something about that remark on obedience stirred Zhang Hao's own memories. Once he had been a boxer of great renown, a champion celebrated by crowds, but no fighter could avoid defeat forever. In the ring, he was both warrior and victim. His trainer never offered comfort, only insults, even as he bled. Winning was all that mattered. That mentor had shaped Zhang Hao into who he was and could just as easily strip it all away. Even now, as an old man, those ghosts of the past lingered. He urged the women to prepare for movement. Jiang's lackeys must already be combing unit by unit for dissenters. Staying put meant death. But shifting to a new location was already too late. Their reinforced door was smashed wide open. Zhang Hao, Nurse Jin, and the little demon king stood completely exposed. How they were discovered so quickly was baffling. The answer, the oversized baby had sniffed them out, and he drooled hungrily at the sight of his prey. Meanwhile, the soldiers busied themselves with packing mysterious sausage crates, loading them onto their trucks. Their leader took a head count: 97 refugees and 126 boxes of provisions to transport. Hauling that much back to base would be no issue. The scarred captain puffed on his cigar and inquired about the 3 advanced special ops troops he had dispatched earlier. Mr. Jiang nervously admitted that the squad had been slaughtered by a man named Han Feng, distancing himself from any responsibility. Learning that his men had been wiped out clearly pushed Scar into a rage. Zhang Ziyu clarified that Han Feng was no ordinary man but a superhuman. His subordinates confirmed the tale, claiming they had seen him wield a mysterious light-based ability. Trying to show his loyalty, Mr. Zhang mentioned he had handled the unpleasant jobs, even crafting those infamous sausages from dubious meat. Just before he let slip something better left unspoken. Captain Scar cut him off sharply. Desperate to prove his value and avoid execution, Mr. Zhang pressed on. Yet Captain Scar was already satisfied this man had proven himself useful. To Scar, he was now part of the crew, and Scar never harmed his own without cause. For the time being, Scar resolved to send someone to track down this Han Feng for a proper interrogation. After all, liars were what he despised most. The tracker chosen for this task was none other than the hulking brute known as Big Baby, smashing the door open in one blow. The oversized simpleton demanded to know whether Han Feng was inside. Li Zhenghao instantly seized the little demon king. He used his own body to shield Nurse Jin. Anyone capable of tearing down a door fortified with Han Feng's power was clearly a terrifying threat. Worse still, Zhenghao's battle instinct screamed at him to escape. The monstrous brute before him radiated the feral aura of a wild beast. Years of combat told Zhenghao there was no hope in a direct fight. They had to escape this room immediately. The old man hurled his elbow against the window to break it, but nearly shattered his own bones in the attempt. Unfortunately, that glass had been reinforced during Han Feng's earlier strengthening efforts. With no easy exit available, Yung Hao urged the girls to run while he held the creature at bay. Before violence could erupt, Nurse Jin calmly stepped forward, insisting they knew nothing of anyone named Han Feng. Shockingly, the beast accepted her innocent plea and even apologized for disturbing them. Nurse Jin sighed in relief while Li Yonghao stood dumbfounded. On his way out, Big Baby double-checked the room number in bold red 1804. He hadn't made a mistake. That girl had blatantly lied to his face. Enraged, Big Baby slammed his palms into the floor, shaking the entire level. Li Zhenghao clutched at the window and discovered it could actually slide open. In haste, he grabbed the girls and hurled them out toward the snowy expanse outside. Just before the plunge, Nurse Jin caught sight of the brute nearly trampling the old man underfoot. If there was one thing Big Baby loathed, it was liars. From 18 floors up, the girls plummeted freely into the snow. The commotion sent the entire neighborhood into chaos. Meanwhile, Han Feng and Brother Liu stumbled upon a rather amusing way to return home. Snowboards. Every mistake Brother Liu had made along the journey was suddenly forgiven, thanks to this brilliant snowboarding idea. The boards carried them swiftly, smoothly, and joyfully back toward Xingfu District. Once they reached the outskirts of the neighborhood, they began searching for a window to sneak through. That was when the eruption from the 18th floor echoed, followed by the sight of the girls falling. Remaining composed, the little demon king opened her storage midair. She released every cushioned mat she had over their landing zone. The mats scattered down, layering the snowy pile beneath. The girls landed with a thunderous crash atop the snow and mats, nearly striking Han Feng and Brother Liu below. Thankfully, the soft mats in the deep snow absorbed the brunt of the fall. Han Feng leapt into the crater to pull them up, bewildered at the sudden chaos. Nurse Jin hurriedly explained that a monstrous brute had stormed into their unit, shouting Han Feng's name. And speaking of that brute, he wasn't about to waste time with stares. Nurse Jin dragged Han Feng and their tiny mascot out of the snowy crater. The beast, however, disliked being called a monster. In his mind, he was just a good baby. Just as Han Feng thought he was safe, the tunneling brute emerged right in front of him once again. Pushing herself beyond her limit, Nurse Jin shouted at her companions to run on their own instead of dragging her along. As they fled, all eyes turned to Han Feng for a strategy to shake off their terrifying pursuer. They were only moments away from disaster. Big Baby was ravenous, craving human flesh for his next meal. At last, inspiration struck Han Feng. He halted, urging the others to keep running ahead. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a bag and wound up for a baseball-style pitch, his throw charged with green light. The bag soared into the air, glowing as its contents reacted with the energy. The brute bit down eagerly, tasting what he thought was a delectable snack, soybeans. Han Feng muttered an apology for what was about to happen as his green light surged. In an instant, the hundreds of seeds inside the brute's mouth sprouted, swelling into living plants. Vines and leaves burst violently from his throat and nostrils in a grotesque display. Predictably, Big Baby began choking on the invasive stalks, gasping for air. He clawed the vines out of his throat, tearing flesh in the process, blood staining the snow beneath his feet. His fury toward Han Feng only grew. Humiliated again and again, he bellowed threats. But his quarry had already vanished. Like a spoiled child, he pounded the snow in a tantrum, denied his treat. At last, the special forces emerged from their hideout, forming ranks to secure the perimeter. Captain Scar rallied his men, reminding them that in this frozen wasteland, cornering their prey was inevitable. He strode toward his battered prize student, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. Big Baby relayed what had happened, the beans that had instantly grown inside his mouth. Scar's interest sharpened. With such an ability, the global food shortage could be solved. He radioed the team who had captured the old man upstairs. already scheming to bait the superhuman into the open. Meanwhile, Han Feng's group had put some distance between themselves and their hunters. Nurse Jin recounted everything that had unfolded during Han Feng and brother Liu's absence. She warned Han Feng that the anomaly was specifically targeting him. Anyone who could rip through reinforced walls and doors posed a dire threat, especially since Han Feng's enhancements had withstood explosives before. Nurse Jin's eyes welled with tears as she recalled how Li Yonghao risked his life to save them. Han Feng coldly reasoned that Zheng Hao was most likely dead. To honor his sacrifice, they had no choice but to keep going. But both Nurse Jin and the Little Demon King refused to accept that view. They insisted the old man could still be saved. Even brother Liu agreed they owed Li Zhenghao a debt. It wasn't that Han Feng was unwilling. It was simply reckless to gamble their lives on a rescue with slim odds. Yet the girls were right. Li Yonghao was still alive, though beaten nearly to death. Dragging the injured man through the snow, Captain Scar announced through a megaphone. He was certain Han Feng's group was close. He declared that the earlier violence had been a misunderstanding. Spotting Li Zhenghao paraded through the snow, Nurse Jin nearly leapt from hiding. Scar then proclaimed his desire for Han Feng to join his ranks. If Han Feng agreed, his supposed wife, daughter, and brother would be granted official protection and care. The announcement baffled the group. The enemy clearly had their facts wrong. When no response came, Captain Scar turned to the old man, asking if Han Feng was truly so cold that he'd abandon his brother. Li Zhenghao laughed, explaining he had only met the young man a few days prior. For that, he was struck harshly. Scar could not fathom risking one's life for strangers. Zhenghao added that Han Feng had likewise only known those girls for a few days. They weren't his family. Captain Scar realized his intelligence had been completely flawed, so he changed tactics, trying to tempt Han Feng to stop endangering himself for strangers. If it was women he wanted, Scar promised him plenty back at the base. For a moment, Han Feng almost faltered at the offer, until brother Liu and Nurse Jin pulled him back to his senses. After all, when the grown-ups are this unreliable, the young demon sovereign stepped forward with a scheme to rescue Uncle Yonghao. Meanwhile, down in the streets, Captain Scar ground his boot into the old man's shattered arm, tormenting him for answers. Yet, against these so-called military hounds, Zheng Hao endured with unshakable grit. Rather than submit, he pressed on with his own questions about this mysterious base. Captain Scar repeated the same hollow lines everyone else gave, insisting their camp was saving lives, a noble facade that ordinary folk could never comprehend. Yonghao burst out laughing. That canned reply was so blatantly staged it was laughable. Knowing the man would soon perish, Captain Scar leaned in close to whisper the truth straight into his ear. In the frostbitten ruins, there remains one species still abundant, swarming in such numbers they can be hunted and devoured at will. Zheng Hao had feared as much, but hearing it confirmed by the perpetrators chilled his bones. These beasts are corralling survivors like cattle for slaughter. The living devour food and the dead become the next meal. Just as Captain Scar was about to blast Yonghao's skull apart, a cascade of random objects, both large and small, came tumbling from above. Upon closer look, the soldiers were dumbstruck by the downpour of liquor, cigarettes, and foodstuffs. Fresh vegetables and slabs of meat even tumbled into the mix. Their so-called big baby sprinted first, with the rest of the soldiers scrambling into the snow to seize whatever treasures they could. Captain Scar fired a round skyward, bellowing for order as his men went feral. But his warning fell flat. Raising his guard, he realized this was the oldest trick in the book. At any moment, an ambush was bound to strike. A grinding, crushing sound echoed from afar. A nearby wall split apart as a bulldozer tore through, leaving a massive gaping hole. At the controls sat Han Feng, itching to paint the snow red. From the little demon king's vantage, the plan was crystal clear. First, scatter enticing bait from the skies to lure in the starving flock. In other words, chuck random junk to stir chaos in the ranks. Then Han Feng would charge in with his iron beast, snatch their wounded comrade and crush the flock like sheep, meaning the bulldozer would carve a path to rescue Li Zhenghao. Sadly, Han Feng was the only one patient enough to interpret her wild fantasies. With the plan laid out, the four moved under the evil eye's so-called divine inspiration. Despite how crude and absurd it was, they weren't even sure the soldiers would take the bait. As for the Iron Beast, she had one tucked away in her storage dimension. Han Feng never imagined his night would end with him operating heavy-duty construction gear. Still, gripping the wheel of such raw power felt damn good. The dozer landed firm on its tracks, cutting through deep snow like butter. He swerved toward the soldiers and shoved them aside with the front blade. Too busy looting, the soldiers hardly noticed themselves being flung away. Captain Scar spun to his big baby, his only chance to halt the juggernaut. Following orders, the youthful powerhouse leapt into the bulldozer's path. With blind confidence in his own strength, Big Baby braced his arms against the machine. Han Feng knew the brute's power well, but trying to outmuscle industrial machinery was sheer madness. Timing it right, he caught the superhuman off guard with the blade, flipping him high into the air. After a dozen spins, the giant's skull crashed into the snow head first. Captain Scar threatened to blow Li Zhenghao's brains out if Han Feng didn't stop. But inside the bulldozer's cab, Han Feng heard nothing beyond the roar of the engine. He pushed forward, unfazed by hollow threats. It became a game of chicken, and Captain Scar was the one who flinched. Diving out of the path, he grudgingly applauded the young man's ruthless nerve. Now all that remained was to scoop up the old man and get out alive. The rescue was a rousing success. Next came the escape. From the cab, Han Feng unleashed his violet glow to soften the ground beneath Zheng Hao, making his ride less punishing. With comfort ensured, they accelerated straight toward another towering skyscraper nearby. Han Feng gave the cue and the others made their move. Brother Liu, Nurse Jin, and their little strategist smashed through a window and climbed onto the bulldozer's roof. As the machine thundered away, the soldiers finally regained focus, firing wildly at the metallic beast. They scrambled into armored jeeps and trucks, giving chase to the crew who humiliated them with such a laughably simple ruse. Bullets rained with fury, though their aim left much to be desired. Captain Scar nearly shouted his driver deaf, demanding more speed. But the heavy snow clogged the roads, their tires lost grip, and acceleration was impossible. They were chasing a bulldozer that could smash through any blockade. It was hopelessly one-sided. Even their own camp only had a handful of such treasures, and judging by the markings, this one was theirs, the same machine used by the advance party. That realization only stoked Scar's rage further. No matter how desperately they tried, the slippery roads betrayed them. One jeep spun out, wrecking the path and forcing the others to halt pursuit. Scar's own vehicle nearly exploded as a loose fuel canister slammed into their windshield. Looking ahead, they found the road clogged with appliances and debris, blocking every route. Once again, the little demon king had saved them, scattering another storm of junk across the road. This time purely as a deterrent. She stood atop the dozer's roof, smugly reveling in her role, making their enemies choke on despair. She looked every bit the conqueror, until the bitter cold made her sneeze cutely. The bulldozer rolled on for hours, ensuring no one dared follow. One by one, the rest of the group squeezed into the cab with Han Feng. It was crowded. Brother Liu begged for his turn at the wheel while the old man shivered in the back. Their next stop was the hillside villa Han Feng and Brother Liu had scouted, a decent shelter for camp. Everyone agreed without protest, but the bulldozer began sputtering. Warning lights blinked, they were running dry on fuel. Luckily, they had the evil king's storage dimension. Han Feng asked politely for her to fetch some oil. The delusional little monarch cracked open her storage, producing endless bottles of cooking oil. At least it wasn't baby oil, small mercies. Right then, the bulldozer's engine died completely. Han Feng rubbed his temples in frustration. Clearing the confusion, he asked her to take out the fuel he had stashed earlier. She dug around her storage dimension, growing more flustered by the second. As it turned out, she had accidentally tossed the fuel canisters in with the fridges, couches, and junk she'd hurled into the road. Even the generators were gone. Hearing this, the whole group despaired. Their precious resources had been discarded. Han Feng had prepared a year's worth of fuel, but now nothing remained. The little monarch tried to console him by producing cooking gas. She even pulled out buckets of coal as though that would help. Han Feng could only stare in disbelief. Yet as he held a lump of coal, a reckless idea struck him. From prior experiments, he knew plants that failed under his power became a coal-like combustible. Meat, however, transformed into a strange black fluid with flammable properties. With no options left, he demanded a metal bucket and some meat. Once set up, he channeled his green glow into a chunk of meat. Success was hard, but failure was effortless. The meat chunk oozed until the bucket was nearly half filled with an oily black substance. The stench made everyone gag, though Han Feng was used to it. He flicked a lighter and ignited the muck. Flames roared to life, it burned easily. He allowed himself a satisfied grin. But Li Zhenghao doubted, could this grotesque sludge truly replace fuel? Unless they abandoned the bulldozer and trudged through the blizzard, they had no choice but to try. So Han Feng generated bucket after bucket of liquefied rotten meat turned fuel. He twisted the ignition, and against all odds the massive machine roared back to life. It felt like a breakthrough. Han Feng truly was a one-man survival squad. Their journey pressed on, bulldozing through the freezing, endless night. Midway through the ride, the little demon king began handing out snacks to everyone. She unveiled an entire rack's worth of treats, letting each person pick their fill. Zheng Hao questioned just how much he had stashed in that strange dimension. Then he remembered the news of a supermarket being mysteriously looted overnight and quickly connected the dots. While the group crunched on their chosen goodies, the hillside villa finally emerged in sight. With the dozer, they could likely power straight up in a single charge. Yet the moment Han Feng floored the pedal, the dozer's engine gave out and blew apart. The improvised fuel they'd relied on was probably to blame. Thankfully, the machine had lasted until they were nearly at their goal. Just a short trek separated them from shelter, so they trudged on through the howling blizzard. Along the way, they passed the frozen bandits Han Feng had sent into the wild without coats. Unconcerned, the crew strode into the fortified villa without ceremony. By the time they made it inside, their bodies trembled on the edge of hypothermia. They found the fireplace, tossed in some coals, sparked a flame, and gathered tightly around its warmth. At last, they could breathe easy. They had survived Captain Scar and his elite hunters. Nothing compares to circling a fire during a raging blizzard. Even the usually stern old man cracked a smile, conceding that the villa district was an excellent hideout. Winds swept the snow downhill, keeping the peak clear. Intruders would struggle to scale the hill unnoticed. The spot was defensible, easy to guard yet hard to storm. With effort, it could serve as a long-term base. While Li Zhenghao pressed serious questions, the others busied themselves rearranging furniture. Han Feng handled the generator, the Demon Monarch produced a TV, and Brother Liu fawned over Gen 9 XPS console. Clearly, they were settling in for the long haul. Since the generator they had prepped was tossed away, Fortune smiled that the villa's previous owners had left one stocked with fuel. Han Feng fiddled with the controls and brought it back online. Finally, they basked in the return of electricity. Han Feng declared they ought to celebrate with a feast tonight, but the women were more eager to use the water heater and take a proper bath. Nurse Jin, in particular, lit up at the word bath. She confessed she hadn't showered since the snowstorm began, so hot water sounded like heaven. She admitted she reeked. The thought of Nurse Jin bathing made Han Feng blush like fire. He reassured her that setting up the bath would be top priority. Yet upon inspecting the basement, he realized the task was far from simple. The water pipes were frozen solid and the heater was broken. The bathroom itself was a wreck, snowed over, frozen through. The pipes were hopeless, but with a bathtub there was still a chance. First, they surrounded the tub with several space heaters. Then they dumped heaps of snow into it. Next came the secret weapons, high-powered heating rods. With multiple appliances combined, they managed to melt the snow into usable water. They kept watch as the rods worked. Yet progress was painfully slow. Hours passed and the water was still frigid. Just as Han Feng tested it again, a jolt of electricity sparked from the rods and zapped his hand. He yanked it back instantly and noticed something odd. His red light surfaced instinctively. Checking once more, the icy water had suddenly turned warm. It was highly likely the red light triggered the rapid heating effect. With the bath finally ready, the women bolted straight for the bathroom. Nurse Jin eagerly stripped bare, exposing everything. But of course nothing could be shown, and with the little demon king present, it was just wrong. She dug into her storage and pulled out bath bombs in every scent imaginable, plus shampoos, conditioners, shower gels, skincare oils, and moisturizers. It was paradise for her. Overjoyed, Nurse Jin hugged the demon king tight, burying her in her chest. They lingered in that bath far too long, and who could blame them? It was bliss amidst a frozen world. With only the girls soaking together, Nurse Jin teased the Demon King's small figure. The little one took offense, insisting she was already 21. None of them had ever asked her real age. Everyone just assumed she was some middle schooler. She claimed the Demon King's power preserved her eternal youth. She ought to be studied in a lab. Meanwhile, just outside the bathroom, Han Feng pressed his ear to the door, listening intently to the water. Brother Liu strolled over and dragged him away to play video games. Han Feng pretended to act nonchalant, but the gangster could see straight through him. No feigned cool could fool a fellow viewer. Brother Liu boldly declared that a real man would peek without shame. He was ready to do so right then. Han Feng had to wrestle him away before he committed a crime. In the end, the guys settled for playing games in the living room while Zheng Hao looked on. The old man couldn't fathom how the youngsters could play games so casually in such grim times. But to them, with everything they needed at hand, why wouldn't they relax? They were clearly planning to remain in the villa for a long while. Without entertainment, boredom would slay them before the weather did. Han Feng knew Zheng Hao's background wasn't simple. As for himself, he only sought a comfortable life. As long as the old man didn't drag them into trouble, he was fine staying put. Since the topic was open, Zheng Hao felt compelled to reveal his true identity. He was about to confess his mission investigating superhumans. But Han Feng cut him short. He wanted no part in complicated, troublesome affairs, and he meant it. Their eyes locked, and Zheng Hao saw Han Feng's unwavering resolve. The elder sighed, respecting the young man's choice. He promised to depart as soon as his arm healed. Brother Liu and Han Feng went back to gaming, trading insults as they played. Just then the women returned from the bath, clad in cute new coats. Brother Liu slung his arm around Han Feng and suggested they bathe together to conserve water. After some scuffling, Han Feng gave in. The bath sharing was happening whether he liked it or not. He was shoved in, and though reluctant, it felt refreshing. Once clean, the long-awaited feast commenced. They prepared an extravagant spread and ate their fill. At last, everyone retired to their rooms, sinking into the best sleep they'd had in ages. Over the following days, after settling in, Han Feng reinforced the villa's walls, roof, and fences, making use of his time and resources. He even converted a top-floor room into a sauna for everyone to share. There he often sweated while gazing out the watchtower window, keeping an eye on the hill below. One day, a few silhouettes approached, inching closer to their fortress. One staggered, then collapsed in the snow halfway up. The group rushed out and carried the fallen stranger inside. Brother Liu recognized him immediately. It was Brother Chang, one of Director Liu's men. Han Feng had met him once before. Director Liu was that fierce gangster who had once sold Han Feng a gun. Hours later, Chang awoke with a splitting headache, disoriented. His eyes darted around until he spotted Brother Liu, which only deepened his confusion. He also recognized Han Feng, despite meeting him only once. Once calm, he recounted his tale. Days earlier, their office had been assaulted by ruthless soldiers, leaving many wounded or dead. The news enraged Brother Liu, who demanded to know Director Liu's fate. You see, Director Liu had heeded Han Feng's warning and stockpiled supplies before disaster struck. With enough to last, the director had generously sheltered and aided hundreds of locals. All was well until soldiers attacked days ago, looting supplies and slaughtering without mercy. To shield civilians, Director Liu and his men fought back to the last breath. Many brothers fell or were wounded. The director himself was shot in the leg and captured. The account fit perfectly. No wonder Chang had limped to their doorstep. Brother Liu grew deeply worried for the director. Thankfully, it was obvious the soldiers wanted him alive. Brother Li was indebted to that man for a tremendous kindness. Had it not been for Director Liu, he likely would have perished on the streets long ago. Fired up with determination, Li yanked Chang off the couch and insisted that they go together to rescue the director. Xin scolded the thug for trying to rope him into a suicide mission. With just 2 people, there was no way they could take on an entire armed battalion. From Lizzie's perspective, it was worth risking everything on even the faintest glimmer of hope, even if it cost them their lives. Li Zhenghao overheard the conversation and asked if the Director Liu they spoke of was from the uprising volunteer group. Back in his underground boxing days, that very man had once paid his ransom. He pulled him out of the filthy underworld and gave him a new lease on life as a free man. If they were setting out to save such a man of honor, Li Jinghao would gladly add his strength to their cause. He still held quite a few connections within the city. If he could reach out to them, they might have the manpower needed. Chang suddenly realized that Zheng Hao was none other than the infamous wild dog of the boxing ring, the legendary fighter who once secured 30 consecutive victories. Han Feng burst out laughing at such a cheesy nickname. Even Yung Hao looked embarrassed to hear himself called that. And so, 3 people pledged themselves to the mission of rescuing Director Liu. Han Feng, however, sat quietly in the corner, unable to fathom that the very gangster who sold him firearms could also be such a principled man. Still, he had no intention of wagering his life for a stranger, so he made it clear in advance that he would remain behind the safe walls of his villa. He might not march into danger with them, but he refused to let the 3 set off empty-handed. At the same time, he reminded Yung Hao and Li Zi that their superhuman abilities must remain a secret for obvious reasons. While Chang was recovering, Han Feng looked after him as best he could. They couldn't serve extravagant meals or it would raise suspicions. Even the room prepared for Chang was stripped down to bare essentials, designed so it wouldn't appear too luxurious. When the day of departure came, each bag was filled with ample supplies, guns, and ammunition. Han Feng could understand the demand for weapons and instant rations. What baffled him, however, was Chang's insistence on bringing so many cigarettes. In this world, cash held no value anymore. When factions traded, cigarettes had become the most reliable form of currency. Alongside that, they carried skis. Han Feng sent the 3 off with a cheerful smile. Chang bowed deeply in gratitude to brother Han and sister-in-law Jin, vowing that the uprising volunteer group would one day repay this generous debt. It took Nurse Jin a moment to realize he had mistaken her for Han Feng's wife. When it clicked, her cheeks flared red, burning hot enough to melt the frost around her. Left alone in the villa with just Han Feng and the 2 girls, he felt even more compelled to ensure their safety. To better monitor the hillside, he installed cameras along the perimeter. He blanketed the neighborhood with CCTV coverage, ensuring he had clear visuals of everything happening nearby. With security locked down, he returned to his easygoing routine of snacks and video games. On this day, Nurse Jin came running out of the kitchen screaming, brandishing a knife in panic. Shaking, she tried to explain what had happened with little Chu Q. It was a catastrophe. They were down to their very last cabbage. Han Feng demanded to know exactly how many fruits and vegetables were still in stock. QQ responded that they had plenty left. By plenty, she meant around 3 carts. Since she wasn't fond of vegetables to begin with, she hadn't hoarded much when raiding the supermarket. The only one she adored was cucumbers, so she had mountains of those stored. This was a critical oversight. They had been consuming supplies without ever conducting a proper inventory. If this continued, they could easily deplete their fresh food. At present, Han Feng's powers only worked on soybeans, wheat, broccoli, and meat. Every other attempt had been a complete disaster. With their final cabbage in hand, he now had to figure out a way to reproduce more. Everyone's health and morale depended on him. Bringing the cabbage back into the living room, he racked his brain for a solution. The only choice seemed to be praying that God's green light would bless his efforts. The first attempt reduced the leafy treasure into nothing but a charred lump. He stripped off another leaf and gave it another try. Without altering his crude method, he only managed to produce more ash. He repeated the process over and over until every cabbage leaf was gone. Refusing to end in failure, he shifted to carrots and potatoes instead. The girls, meanwhile, watched him from afar as if it were a comedy show. By day's end, he had ruined every single vegetable he touched, without a single stroke of luck. When Nurse Jin checked in on him, Han Feng naturally felt terrible for rendering their precious food completely useless. Little Chu Q, however, didn't mind the loss. With her endless cucumber stash, she wasn't worried. Besides, vitamin supplements could make up for missing nutrients. Since the path of superpowers had failed, Nurse Jin suggested they turn to the more practical route, planting a garden. Back in her old apartment, she used to grow vegetables on the balcony all year round. As long as there was steady light and proper temperature, it was entirely possible. First on the list were gardening racks, soil, and nutrient solutions. LED lamps could even serve as substitutes for sunlight. But as the plan took shape, Su Qiu, the same one who supposedly raided an entire supermarket, confessed that she had none of the essentials. Neither Nurse Jin nor Han Feng had accounted for her sheer lack of foresight. Outside the villa, they attempted to dig soil from the yard, yet the earth was frozen solid and their shovels could barely scratch the surface. With her superhuman strength, Nurse Jin gave it a shot, but her strike sent the shovel head soaring high into the sky. They were wasting precious time in the freezing cold, so Han Feng suggested they retreat indoors to rethink the approach, as punishment for not having the necessary supplies in her stash. The little Demon King was tasked with fashioning makeshift plant containers out of plastic water bottles. To their surprise, she excelled at it. She already had several completed containers ready to be filled with soil. In a world like this, recycling turned out to be a life-saving skill. Those plastic bottles would cradle their future harvest. Since she was diligently keeping at her work, Chu Q snapped at the others about the soil they were supposed to provide. They were only at the beginning stage of gardening, and already they were stumbling. The frozen earth remained their biggest hurdle. QQ suggested they use a heating rod to thaw the frozen ground, though its effect would surely be limited. If they could just find a way to melt the ice instantly, their plan could finally move forward. That very thought made the Demon King leap from her seat. She summoned the so-called Apostle of Bathwater to unleash his true ability. Han Feng immediately grasped what she was hinting at. Last time, his red light had heated their bathwater in an instant. If he could uncover the principle behind that event, he might succeed in thawing the frozen yard. For 20 minutes, he dipped his red-lit hand into a bucket of water, but nothing happened. Han Feng tried to replay every detail of the bathwater incident, searching for what had triggered the warmth. Then it struck him the hidden factor was electricity. He turned to the Demon King and asked for something that could deliver a shock. She immediately produced a high-power outlet strip. If he plugged it in and stuck a finger inside, death would be instantaneous. She was basically suggesting suicide. After rummaging further through storage, she finally unearthed a more reasonable tool, a low-voltage self-defense electric baton, which she proudly dubbed a basic electromagic staff. Even though the label claimed it would only cause minor numbness, Han Feng still felt uneasy about turning it on himself. But this time he chose to trust the Demon King's judgment. He powered up the baton and plunged his hand into the bucket of water. Do not try this at home. The shock was far stronger than expected, sending his eyes rolling back in pain. At least the water finally heated up. Excited by this breakthrough, Han Feng rushed outside, ready to electrocute himself for the sake of soil. He still didn't fully understand the science, but he knew it worked. Pressing his red glowing palm against the frozen ground, he deliberately jabbed the electric baton into his own arm. This time he endured the shock better, and the thick icy crust within the soil shattered and melted away. In his palm lay a puddle of warm water and at last, usable soil. Han Feng was ecstatic. It had been ages since he'd laid eyes on ordinary dirt. He dug up enough earth to fill the improvised planters, completing their initial preparations. Thankfully, Chu Qiu's storage included plenty of seed packets. Han Feng wanted to grab some at random, but Nurse Jin firmly insisted that most wouldn't survive the cold. As expected from someone who once gardened as a hobby, she carefully selected only those that had a chance of enduring low temperatures. They decided to use the villa's basement for its superior insulation. Filling it with high-powered LED lights and furnaces, they spared no expense. Even so, the temperature remained below the required level. If they couldn't raise the warmth, the seeds would never germinate. Since the setup was nearly ideal already, perhaps Han Feng's green light could supplement the growth. He gave it a try, synchronizing completely with the seed. He controlled his energy and rhythm as if playing a precision game. To his astonishment, it worked. A tender, leafy sprout emerged. Encouraged, he used the green light on the other seeds as well. The outcomes were mixed with many failures, but through repeated trials with new seeds, Han Feng and Nurse Jin produced dozens of sprouts. Sadly, most began to wither within days under the relentless cold. Even with the heaters blasting at maximum, they could barely push the temperature past 10 degrees. They needed to devise a way to raise the room's temperature to at least 20 degrees. Adding more furnaces was an option, but without better insulation, there was only so much those machines could achieve. In theory, the deeper they dug underground, the better the heat retention would be. Perhaps they could extend the basement further down. Nurse Jin approved of the plan. With her monstrous strength, creating another floor beneath the house would not pose a problem. Before resorting to sheer muscle, Han Feng wanted to test whether his light powers could accelerate the process. He already knew that green and red were useless against concrete. Maybe purple's softening effect could come into play. As expected, it proved somewhat effective. Unfortunately, while the softened stone resembled mud, it was still just as solid as before. At his wit's end, Han Feng tried mixing all three of his lights, rearranging their sequence and varying his rhythm. Every attempt ended in failure. Failed experiments turned plants into coal and meat into fuel, but stone remained unchanged. Perhaps this was simply the divide between organic and inorganic matter. After several days of setbacks, Han Feng reached his breaking point. In frustration, he slammed his red light-coated fist into the floor. That's when he discovered that if the red light's intensity surpassed a certain threshold, it could shatter anything in its path. By fully releasing the red light, expanding its range, and gradually amplifying the force, he finally succeeded. With careful precision, he carried out a controlled demolition of the flooring. The stubborn stone that had plagued him for days finally gave way. The results were outstanding, but the strain on his body was immense. Breaking down just a small section of the floor left him collapsed from exhaustion. Now he needed to train his body to handle using this ability multiple times a day. Having discovered the fastest method, Han Feng took charge of digging the new chamber. Nurse Jin helped by hauling the shattered debris outside with her raw strength. The entire operation stretched on for a week. Together, they dug 10 meters below the basement, carving out a 20 square meter space. After some serious remodeling, their underground greenhouse finally took shape. Han Feng and Nurse Jin felt immense satisfaction watching their little garden of sprouts take root in the new chamber. Next came Han Feng's personal highlight of the recent days. Every time they climbed the narrow stairs back up to the first basement, he always let Nurse Jin go first, enjoying what he shamelessly considered the sweet view of victory. In this, he was truly one of us. If everything progressed smoothly, harvest season should arrive in about 2 months. By now, 2 weeks had already passed since they began the project. Their stored food ran out 4 days ago, leaving them stuck eating heaps of broccoli. Han Feng could no longer stomach those green devils. But he had no choice. That was the one vegetable he could consistently grow with his green light. Perhaps they could switch to planting bean sprouts. They were fast-growing and edible in no time. Or maybe fate had other ideas. As Han Feng pondered, Nurse Jin's foot slipped from above. A soft cushion came crashing down on his face. Caught off guard, he didn't even get a chance to savor it. Once they reached the basement level again, Han Feng repeatedly assured Nurse Jin that he was fine. Blood streamed from his nose, but there was a good chance it wasn't from the impact. Nurse Jin tried to examine the heavy bleeding. Too embarrassed, he brushed her off, and when they returned to the living room, they stumbled into a bizarre sight. Chu Qiu had drawn an occult symbol onto the carpet. In the center sat a laptop while she danced and chanted around it. It sounded as though she was attempting to summon the so-called fifth evil eye. That apparently was what she called one of their CCTV feeds. In truth, she was just trying to repair a broken camera with magic. Nurse Jin and Han Feng rushed over to the malfunctioning feed to perform real maintenance. The worsening snowstorms had been causing their CCTVs to fail more frequently. While Han Feng was swapping out the faulty camera, a faint explosion echoed nearby, loud enough to startle them. With visibility so severely reduced, it was impossible to identify the source. Han Feng dismissed it as nothing worth worrying about. He was certain there were people on the other side of the hill, but figured as long as they kept to themselves, there would be no problem. The next afternoon, Han Feng woke and went about his routine. The first thing he did was descend into the second basement to continue his experiments. His mind was consumed with the goal of accelerating their garden's progress. He began sprouting fresh seeds. But finding the right rhythm was difficult. The patterns that worked for some plants refused to work for others. For each new vegetable, he had to start again from scratch, relearning the entire tempo. He spent half an hour straight repeating practice and making mistake after mistake. Truly, this is the worst possible day to be raising crops in the garden. In only 30 minutes, Hanfeng managed to reduce most of their seedlings into nothing but charred remains. Luckily, he never touched the first set of vegetables that were nearly ready to harvest. Perhaps he was overexerting himself. Maybe just the faintest use of his power would be enough to accelerate growth. Taking a gamble with their progress, he carefully bathed the first batch in a trace of green light for another half hour. He was cautious not to overwhelm them, so he strictly limited the exposure each day. By the 5th day, all the crew's labor finally paid off. In this case with vegetables. Holding up the enormous Chinese cabbage pot, Hanfeng's grin stretched from ear to ear. Oddly, a radish shaped like a human foot and tomatoes that looked straight out of another dimension also sprouted up. The strangest one of all was an enormous cabbage sitting alone in the corner like a hulking giant. Admittedly, the vegetables strengthened by his microdoses of green light looked unusual, but at least they were thriving. Given their circumstances, they would eat anything edible no matter the appearance. Still, that foot-shaped radish was seriously questionable. Most of the crops ended up cooked into a full-blown vegetable banquet. 2 weeks' worth of effort vanished in one sitting, but it was completely satisfying. Even the Demon King changed her mind about farming, now declaring she wanted to grow strawberries and honeydew next. Out of all the dishes, the only thing left untouched was the sautéed cabbage from that monstrous harvest. Nobody wanted to deal with it anymore, there was simply too much of it. Moments like these made Hanfeng think of Brother Liu. That man would probably clear any plate without a single complaint. It had already been 2 weeks since Li headed downhill. Whatever food they brought must be long gone by now. All Hanfeng could do was silently wish for their safety. Just as they were finishing the feast, another blast echoed from afar. This marked the 6th day they had been hearing such dreadful sounds. Confident in their hidden refuge, they weren't overly concerned. After all, the explosions only occurred once each day. But 3 days later, the bombardments escalated sharply. A torrent of detonations rattled the hillside. The situation grew so disruptive that Hanfeng's calm days were no longer intact. The constant thunder of blasts was beginning to fray his nerves. At last, he pulled out a ladder and climbed onto the villa's roof to see firsthand what chaos was unfolding below. Even aided by his binoculars, Hanfeng couldn't clearly discern what was happening across the frozen hills. He wondered who could possibly be bold enough to create such chaos. Whoever it was clearly didn't care about concealing their position. Though there was still some distance from the villa, if the bombings crept closer, things would turn dangerous fast. Hanfeng wasn't about to test whether his reinforced body could withstand a direct explosion. Their walls were the real concern, too short and too thin. Maybe it was time for another renovation. Though the situation outside remained unclear, building taller, sturdier defenses sounded like the best precaution. Since QQ lacked cement in her storage, the usual methods were out of reach. Fortunately, plenty of usable material had already been gathered nearby. The pile of rocks dug up from their basement. Step 1 was stacking the stones neatly. Then came pouring water over the whole structure. With the freezing climate, an ice wall reinforced with stones could even outmatch concrete in durability. The three stooges threw themselves fully into the project, each handling their duties with focus. When the stones were exhausted, Hanfeng scavenged more by dismantling abandoned villas nearby. Through tireless labor, they raised a colossal ice wall within just 3 days. The wall loomed so high it shielded the entire house, finally giving them some peace of mind. But the bombers robbed them of even that small relief. The blasts resumed once more. This time, the explosions were close enough to see clearly from the villa. To make matters worse, each blast's origin crept closer and closer. The frequency of the detonations increased as well. One explosion directly struck a villa in their neighborhood. The eruption hurled debris all across the slope. Fragments even slammed against their freshly completed ice wall. Up on the roof, a rogue shard grazed Hanfeng. The fragment tore across his cheek with surprising force. They were fortunate to have finished the barrier in time. Without it, disaster would have been inevitable. Hanfeng rushed back inside, ordering the girls to take shelter in the second basement. They stayed hidden in the underground garden for half a day before resurfacing. On the second night, while Hanfeng was bathing, fresh bombardments nearly made him faint from shock. He bolted to the basement wearing nothing but a towel. The following morning, a villa beside theirs was obliterated, and one bomb struck their ice wall directly. By the afternoon of the 4th day, Hanfeng was about to relieve himself when a sudden blast made him clench in panic. Even worse, he almost ended up flashing the Demon King by accident. On the 5th day, he could no longer tolerate it. Hanfeng armed himself with his sniper rifle, donned ski gear, and prepared to step into the battlefield. Days of hiding underground left them unable to eat, drink, or rest properly. It was pure torment. He loaded himself with every weapon he had. Furious and geared to the teeth, Han Feng was determined to uncover who was turning this frozen wasteland into their personal war zone. He reminded the girls to follow protocol and take care of themselves until his return. The ski down the slope went smoothly. Along the way, Han Feng finally witnessed the aftermath of the bombardments up close. Pieces of military uniform littered the area, evidence that the army was somehow involved. Perhaps that oversized brute and Captain Scar were tangled in this madness. The deeper he ventured into the heart of destruction, the more mangled corpses he passed. For safety, he climbed to higher ground to watch from above. The higher he ascended, the harsher the cold bit at him, straining his lungs. Gazing through the binoculars, he spotted a massive cave resembling a hidden military base. Cannons were embedded in the rock walls, likely the source of his misery these past days. At the entrance, soldiers acted nervously as if an enemy lurked inside. Then they charged in, firing wildly. It seemed like an internal conflict. Before they could pour in completely, an overwhelming invisible force hurled them back out. One soldier was flung so high he landed right where Han Feng was observing. When Han Feng checked, all that remained was a mangled pile of body parts. That entire squad had been annihilated within seconds. Turning his eyes back to the cave, Han Feng saw a group emerge calmly. 3 figures appeared, a young girl wielding a bazooka, a boy dressed with some flair, and a white-haired woman in glasses and a chic coat. For an instant, the woman seemed to notice something amusing. Her gaze locked directly on Han Feng's hidden perch, her purple eyes gleaming as she smiled. She radiated elegance with an unsettling allure. A chill raced through Han Feng's veins. Even hundreds of meters away, high above her, he felt like helpless prey being stalked. He flattened himself against the ground, survival instincts dulled. Peering again through the binoculars, he saw the girl with the bazooka aiming directly at him, grinning with madness. The weapon targeted the crest of the hill where he lay. Luckily, he managed to slide out of range at the last moment. There was no doubt he had been spotted. Those 3 were terrifying. Han Feng withdrew further into hiding, determined to plan his next move carefully. Not long after, the echoes of relentless gunfire filled the frozen air. A handful of soldiers were still clinging to life, desperately trying to resist the trio. They retreated in terror while unloading their magazines, but the effort was pointless for these doomed men. The young boy blocked off their escape path, commanding the snow to surge forward like a tidal wave, his face remaining completely expressionless. As he pressed down with more force, the mass of snow collapsed inward and then erupted into a colossal icy detonation. Han Feng had to admit it, he was utterly outclassed here. An unstoppable avalanche thundered down the slope, reshaping the landscape itself. Using his red light, Han Feng clawed his way out of the crushing snow, hauling another person with him. He had come frighteningly close to suffocating, but his quick reaction saved him. Now dragging along an unconscious soldier, he stumbled toward shelter. Spotting a dam, he wisely ducked behind it for cover, otherwise he would have been crushed and dragged under by that merciless tide. That cold, detached boy must possess the ability to manipulate snow and ice, an absurdly overpowered gift in a world buried in endless winter. Han Feng hoped the rescued soldier could shed light on that terrifying trio. After some wandering, he discovered a building tall enough not to be completely engulfed by the avalanche. He hauled the soldier inside into a ruined room and secured him with bindings. Once they were out of immediate danger, Han Feng smacked the man awake with the butt of his gun. The soldier's eyes fluttered open, and at once he crumbled, pleading for his life. Han Feng hadn't even asked a single question yet, and the man was already spilling over with fear. He had imagined countless interrogation methods, but disappointingly none would be needed today. Pulling up a chair, Han Feng demanded answers about the woman and those 2 children who had demolished an entire military stronghold. The soldier trembled at the very mention of them. To him, they weren't humans, they were nightmares. One wielded ice, another unleashed energy waves, and the last turned everything she touched into a bomb. Han Feng pressed for a clearer explanation of their abilities, beginning with the woman. That formidable woman could generate energy waves with a flick of her hand, sending whole battalions scattering like paper kites. The deranged little girl possessed explosion magic, able to transform anything into a lethal charge. And the boy, he was pure menace, bending ice and snow to his will, untouchable in this frozen wasteland. As the soldier cursed the trio as inhuman beasts, Han Feng silently reflected. Given the might of his own powers, he couldn't exactly condemn them for relying on theirs. Superhumans were appearing everywhere now, each one more frightening than the last. Han Feng had one final question for the terrified captive, who was responsible for the bombardments near his villa. But the soldier swore his unit had nothing to do with it. Their camp had long ago been overrun by those 3 monsters. Today's battle had been the battalion's last desperate attempt to reclaim it with HQ reinforcements. Han Feng still seethed at the bombings, but taking revenge on the culprits would be easier said than done. The bodies he had passed earlier were almost certainly victims of that woman and her companions. How could anyone possibly stand against such overwhelming power? Knowing lunatics like them were jeopardizing his hard-won peace gnawed at Han Feng's patience. But now that he had extracted the truth, he released the soldier unharmed. Terrified Han Feng might reconsider, the man bolted into the snow without even asking to be untied, his bound hands flailing uselessly as he ran. It didn't matter, he wouldn't need them for long. The moment he reached the open field, an explosion erased him from existence. A barrage followed, engulfing the area around Han Feng's hideout. One blast nearly obliterated him entirely, but Han Feng fortified his wall just in time, shielding himself from the brunt of it. These weren't random detonations. The blasts were precise, clearly aimed at eliminating him. He had concealed himself several hills away, yet those predators still managed to pinpoint his location. The trio, however, weren't even rushing. They remained inside the military compound. The little girl continued flaunting her destructive talents, reveling in her practice. The woman sensed that after the barrage, their target's energy signature hadn't vanished. If anything, it had grown stronger. Whoever they were hunting had survived both avalanche and bombardment, proof of terrifying resilience. The woman commanded another round of explosives. If the target endured, they would pursue. They couldn't risk letting a potential threat slip away. The boy looked disinterested, but the unhinged girl buzzed with excitement. Meanwhile, in his hidden refuge, Han Feng collapsed into a chair, shaken by the sheer number of close calls. He briefly weighed confronting them head-on, but going against 3 superhumans alone would be suicide. Returning home would only mean more bombings raining down. For the sake of preserving his future peace, Han Feng resolved to personally eliminate the menace threatening his way of life. The story ends here. Don't forget to drop a like if you enjoyed, leave your thoughts about this manhwa in the comments, and hit subscribe with the bell on so you won't miss the next video.